Hello.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Bridges Beyond Bars Live. We're glad you're here. Drop where you're from, where you're watching from in the comments. And if you're able to, go ahead and share this live out. Your shares help more people hear this and get involved. Tonight, we're talking about parole in Virginia, its past, its current state, and the gaps we can't ignore.
I am Kirsten. For those of you who don't know me, I am the co founder and president of Bridges Beyond Bars. I found myself in advocacy after someone I love was incarcerated, and that personal experience pulled me into public education, legislative work, and of course, our lives as well. Since advocating, I've gone on to study forensic psychology and continue to work closely with impacted people and their families.
And I'm Sarah. I'm part of the BB team as well. My husband is incarcerated, and that experience opened my eyes to how hard it is to navigate the system, especially around parole. I've seen how isolating it can be and how powerful support really is. That's why I'm here.
So, we are honoured to have Karen Morrison with us tonight. Karen has worked closely with people inside Virginia's prisons and the families supporting them. Through her advocacy, she's helped families prepare for parole, understand the law, and organise around second chances. She also brings tonight a strong understanding of how vague or contradictory the system can be and what that actually means for people with loved ones inside. So let me bring Karen up. Karen, thank you so much for being here. Would you mind introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about what brings you to the conversation tonight for those that might not know you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. So, my name is Karen Morrison. I am the founder and president of Fighting for Freedom, a nonprofit organization that is based in Virginia. I started the work of advocacy when I had a friend that was incarcerated, serving 16 life sentences for a first time nonviolent offense. And how I started was through clemency on the federal level. And during the pandemic, I decided to really try to see what I could do to help people in Virginia. And so I had the pleasure of meeting Miss Lily Branch Kennedy, Paul Taylor, Prince, they call him Prince or Weldon Bunn, and Miss Carol. And with that network right there, it just helped me to phase into the work that I wanted to do. And I got a quick jump start because people were dying in the prisons, and because of the pandemic, and we knew that there was going to be opportunities to get people out through parole and pardons, and that was the start of Fighting for Freedom. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So tonight's conversation is shaped around four key themes. Each one helps us unpack what's really going on with parole in Virginia and why this matters so much. Let's start with the basics, history, structure, and what people often misunderstand.
So, parole in Virginia has a complicated past. It used to be a routine part of the justice process. That changed in the mid-90s with the abolition of parole for most, except for a small group of people still eligible under what we call the old law. But even for those still eligible, confusion's everywhere. People often believe parole is a guaranteed release after a certain time, which is not. Others don't realize that the parole board holds almost full discretion over decisions. And there's also vague and inconsistent communication about public hearings, when they happen, who qualifies for one, and how victims or family members can be involved. And this grey area keeps people in the dark and limits accountability as well. Karen, let's start with what you think is most understood about Virginia's parole system, and I guess a bit about the history as well.
It sounds like we have a lot to unpack tonight.
Yes.
So yes, let me start with, I want to say, misconception about parole. And the way that I describe it is that you have two different systems going on. You have the judicial system where people go to court and they're sentenced. And then you have the Department of Correction where a person will serve their sentence. And what we say is that the Department of Correction has to take their guides from the law, from the legislative branch, right? So when people had discovered about Fishback, where juries were not being informed that parole had been abolished, they automatically thought that, well, this is something that we should get because the judge, juries didn't even know about sentencing guidelines. So when they recommended sentences and judges imposed it, that it was something where sentences were astronomical, right? And that they felt like a remedy that could actually help was giving people the eligibility of parole. But then, like you said in the beginning, that often people think just because now you're eligible for parole, that means that you should be released. And that is a misconception, because it's not that simple. What it is that you have the opportunity to be released from prisons. But then let's go back to the judicial system. When the courts recommend a 58-year sentence, believe it or not, the judges really want a person to do 58 years, right? And so they sentence these numbers because it's a recommended amount of time, and then the sentence that is imposed is 50 years, because when you go to the Department of Corrections, that's the sentence that they really want you to do. So let's say you don't have parole. So if you have a 58-year sentence, normally you'll go into prison and you'll do 85% of that time. And then once you're released, that's your mandatory release date. So in the aspect is that a person who now has parole eligibility, they'll do a fraction of that time, and then they'll start to go through the process where they meet with the parole board, and they can become paroled through the parole board once they find that there's certain criteria that the person meets. So normally what happens is we see that people are really serving about, if it's a 58-year sentence, they're serving around 20 years, and then they start to go through the process of parole eligibility with kind of like Fishback, right? Because by the time Fishback was passed in 2000, I believe 21, people started going up for parole eligibility. And so they were serving at least a minimum of 20 years time before they started going through the process. So let me kind of go back about the history. So right now there's 3 types of people. Actually, it's really 4, right? There's 4 types of the way that a person can become eligible for parole. You have the old law, because they have been in prison prior to the abolishment of parole in 1995. Then you have Fishback, where again, the legislative branch recognized that people were going through the process of taking a jury trial, and that the juries were recommending a sentence and the judges were imposing it. Unfortunately, the juries, when they recommended the sentence, they did not know parole was abolished. So the remedy is to make them eligible for parole, so that you'll hear the term Fishback. And then you have juvenile parole, where, again, the laws came in to say, look, the brain science, the development of a juvenile is really indicating that anyone that's under 18, the brain is not fully developed. So why are we holding them responsible and making them culpable for crime? So let's go ahead and give them the opportunity for juvenile parole, that after serving 20 years, that they can start going up for the eligibility. And I'll tell you about something that I found to be a problem with juvenile parole in a second. And then you have geriatric parole. So those people who, like you said, that didn't get the eligibility of Fishback or didn't have the eligibility of a juvenile, then they're saying, okay, when these people become 60 years old, or I think 65, both 60 and 65 is 2 different numbers, that they can start to go through the process of geriatric parole. And the main exclusion is if the person is classified as having a class 1 felony. If the person is classified as having a class 1 felony, which is like capital murder cases, then they're not eligible for parole. And those people are literally condemned to die in prison. What I'm finding is a problem.
Can I ask, is that for every version of parole? So for all 4 types, capital murder does not apply, or is that only for geriatric?
Geriatric parole.
Okay.
Only for geriatric. That's the only exclusion for geriatric, is if they're convicted of a class 1 felony, they're not eligible for parole.
Okay.
And I'll say something about juvenile. You know, again, another misconception is that it really says that when a person is sentenced as a juvenile and has a sentence of 20 years or more, or serving life without the possibility of parole, they are eligible for juvenile parole. But what we're understanding is that if you have like a split sentence, we're finding this to be a little bit more common than we thought. And a person goes into the juvenile detention center and they turn 21, and then they're transferred to the prison. Well, you would think that time would be, accumulated. And so 20 years is 20 years, right? And what we're finding is there's delayed cases where juveniles are not going up specifically after 20, because for some reason they're not counting that time. And I'm like, why? They didn't just sit at home until they were 21. They were in a facility under the DOC control. So why are you not counting that time? And we've been fighting for some of our people to get that time. And then I have a case, and stop me if you want to ask a question, but I really want to talk about this case that I'm working with, right?
We do have a section later on where we're going to ask you about it. So do you want to park it and we'll come back to give it its own space?
I will park it because this is a situation that has to do with the juvenile eligibility, and then also what's happening. So I'll park that for now.
Cool. Easy. I had a question specifically about, I think, you touched on the 4 different types. So obviously there's been law changes, and there's probably going to be more, let's be honest, right? Like as time goes on and there's more qualifications or there's more research done to support the fact that we need to see more options of parole. Do you see a difference in terms of how the parole board approached somebody that was sentenced when parole was still a thing? Or do you see a sort of across the board feeling in terms of, like, for me as a layperson, I would go, well, the current parole board was enacted after parole was removed, but all these people coming up for parole under old law should be treated a little bit differently, in my opinion. Like, are we seeing that at all in the parole release rates or no?
What we're seeing is parole board currently, that grant rate is extremely low. We're talking about like less than 1%, right? And so it's hard to decipher whether or not there is any bias that's going on with old law versus juvenile or fishback. I think what happens is they put them all in one category, but they do know that this person is classified as a old timer, because of course you're going to see dates of 1973, 1980, 1985, even all the way up to 1994-ish. And so those are considered old timers. And then you have the juveniles, which you'll start to see a little bit like the 2000 kind of time. And then of course the fishback. We strongly say that each category should be looked at differently, because you kind of want to say an old timer should be grandfathered in, right? Mm-hmm. And if you know that back in the days, a person who had committed a murder or even a serious offense as a rape, that the trend was that a person that might have gotten a 25-year sentence under the old law has served 2.5 years, 5 years, right? Then why are they in prison 30 years later? And these people are growing old, right? They're now spending 30, 40, 50 years in prison. I have come across an old timer that the earliest I can date back is to 1966, right? And this is considered old law, an old timer, and he's still trying to get out of prison when people that have committed similar offenses to him have been gone home probably 20 years ago, right? And so, you know, one thing I love about the advocacy groups that's on the ground, I see some that I'm very familiar with for juveniles. They really emphasize, and they're very strong in saying to the parole board, you should be identifying juveniles in specific categories. Like, they have worked extremely hard to put something together called a juvenile decision structure that will talk about mitigating factors of youth, right? It's very important to understand that a juvenile should not be treated the same as an adult because of peer pressure, because of the development or even environmental factors or even parental factors. So why are we treating people who commit crimes at 15 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old as someone whose brain is fully developed at 30, 35 or 40 years old, right? And so those are the things that when we advocate for a person doing the parole process, we really try to point out, especially because my background is I'm a school teacher and I know about disadvantaged youth, and I understand about children whose parents are either, you know, unfortunately have succumbed to drugs, or even parents who are incarcerated. You're not going to get the same level of care than a person who has a 2-family household or even a blended family household, right? And so when we have children that we consider a disadvantaged youth, we ask the parole board to take a look at them specifically to say, look at these mitigating factors of youth that cause them to commit the crime. Of course, we're not really making excuses, but we're saying, please identify these. This is what law scholars or law experts have identified as factors that the board should take into consideration when they are releasing people. There's certain board members that are comfortable in voting to grant juvenile offenders or even youthful offenders. And of course, I can identify them. I'm not going to say who on this meeting, because then they'll know that I really kind of know what they're doing. But there are other board members that will take a look at the old timers and say that they're using it as revolving door, because anytime you have a person that's been in prison since 1983 and you see on their jacket they were released in 1995, but then they committed another crime in 97 and they released them again and came back in 2018 and they're back again, the board tends to not want to release a person like that because they're saying that they're squandering opportunities. They've been paroled twice, and no matter how many times they're paroled, they're coming back and they're reoffending. And how do we stop them from reoffending? Well, don't release them back into society. Let them stay and do the time. And then I think when I started out about the difference between the judicial system and parole, again, you have to understand the board is looking at it is like they're convicted of this crime. They are sentenced to do 25 years, 30 years, 45 years, 50 years, whatever. I still cannot comprehend how someone is comfortable saying that a person is sentenced to 250 years. I mean, that's just astronomical. No one is going to do 250 years. And so what we find is that we always try to get the board to take a look at what we call excessive sentencing. And I think people don't even know, believe it or not, there is on the grant list a reason to grant a person parole is that the person is serving excessive time. And you very rarely will find that as a reason why the board grants, but that is there. They can release a person because the sentence is excessive.
Yeah, I think that discretion part is what especially coming from a country or continent that operates on common law specifically, our judges don't have as much discretion as they do in the United States. We work on an adversarial form of law. And so what it means is that your lower level courts or county courts, we call them magistrates here, cannot sentence outside of precedent. And if they do sentence outside of precedent, then they need to provide a very compelling reason, or it needs to be referred to the Supreme Court. So for that reason, you have to have case law that supports a situation where you're excessively sentencing. However, I think what we're seeing in Virginia is that the precedent now is excessive sentencing, right? So you can find precedent for that excessive sentencing because we had such a tough on crime approach that it's like 200 years for that crime is the precedent. It's like, it's not like, oh, they've gone well and over and above. It's like, oh, no, well, I've got 35 cases that I can show right here that the prosecutor will bring up for precedent when they do the sentencing recommendations that shows that it's normal. And so it's really coming back to that. I think when you were talking about juvenile, like obviously my background is forensic behavioral science and psychology. And I think that kind of speaks to me a lot in terms of the types of people that we have on the parole board and their knowledge. I think a lot of times law doesn't like the influence of psychology in the courtroom, and that's fine for whatever reason. But particularly around culpability and what we know about the maturation of the brain, now that we know better and we know that frontal lobe and the areas of the brain that are allowed to reason and weigh up risk and consequences don't mature until the ages of 25. And then especially if you're experiencing trauma or adverse childhood experience, it can be even longer. And I think, to your point, looking at a man or a woman that has committed a crime at 35 when they've got all this life experience and you're assuming that their brain is matured if there's no other underlying conditions, and looking at a 16-year-old boy or a young girl and saying these two people are exactly culpable as each other is absurd,
right?
In my opinion,
right?
Like it doesn't make sense,
right? I think that in each case, they should be looking at these things individually, or even if they want to do categories where they put things in place. I would like to see them really use the instruments that they have. Like, if you really know that you have a juvenile, you should be looking at those mitigating factors, right? You should be looking at growth and rehabilitation in the prison. I really commend my juvenile offenders when they go in and they understand that they squandered an opportunity because they dropped out of high school, or even some of them stopped in middle school and they go on to get their GED. Why are we not praising them for that, right? Why are we not saying that look at what they have been able to accomplish in a volatile environment, and they have worked their way through, and now they have accomplished their GED? That should start to send a message to the board to say, he might have had situations at home where he couldn't even function, or he was worried about his mom or worried about his dad. But now that he's in an isolated situation, he stayed out of trouble, he's gotten his GED, look at the trades that he's gotten. And then we're so fortunate that some of our people that we're representing, we have seen them, not only are they getting their GEDs, but they're going on and take college courses, right? Mm-hmm. Or beyond college courses, they have gotten like an electrical trade or HVAC. I mean, that's saying something, that now you're acquiring the skills. And I always make reference to the parole board by saying that, because of a school teacher, right? My impression is, let's give you a grade. And if you are only putting out 1% of people that are eligible for parole, then you're failing, because you're not using the skills that you should have had to really identify people that have been rehabilitated. And going back to old timers, because I know, again, categories. If you have a person that's been in prison since 1980, 1985, the crime is not going to change. The serious nature of the crime is not going to change, but the person changes. And if you have a person that might have gotten 1 or 2 infractions in the beginning, but now have 30 years of being infraction free, and the minimum reason to be granted is that the person has shown 24 months of being infraction free, why are the board not saying to, the applicant that person is really ready? They've been in prison for over 30 years, 40 years, and they have been able to stay in an environment, stay out of trouble, and maintain a exemplary prison record, but you're still denying them. And the main reasons you're denying them is the serious nature of the crime, right? The serious nature of the crime. They need more time in prison, and the release of this time is going to diminish the seriousness of the crime. Those are the reasons. And when we have turn downs like that, I always appeal my cases, and I'm saying, well, the board has not proven by preponderance of evidence that the applicant has not demonstrated growth, because they have. What you're saying is that you're not recognizing the fact that the person now has all these numerous accomplishments. They've been able to stay infraction free. They have great recommendations from correctional officers that know them well. So what we're trying to figure out is what motivates the board, right? Why are they not able to recognize the growth in a person? And please, I never want anyone to get me wrong. I understand that they're real victims of crimes, right? That no matter how many years go by, a mother or a wife or someone who had to bury their child or their loved one or their husband still feels the pain 30 years later. But when we're a system that's paying almost $30,000 to $50,000 to incarcerate people, when do we say enough time is enough? I think, statistic wise, and, we look at data too. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, a person who has been convicted of first-degree murder, they get released after 25 years. So why do we have people in 1983 that's still going up for parole eligibility and is being constantly denied to say they need more time? Well, the the trend says that 25 years is sufficient punishment for any person. And then on the counter side, I always try to explain to the board. I look at data, current data, and I won't say the case, but recently a case came out in Norfolk where a gentleman took a plea agreement. He is convicted of killing 2 people, 2 women, and for each person that he killed, he got 4 years. So it's a total of 8 years. So why are you still telling me that a person who has been in prison for 25 years, 30 years still needs to spend more time, when recently someone who committed a crime received only 8 years in prison? And then even furthermore, I just read an article, won't say any names, but out of West Virginia, a young student was drunk, like he had a DUI, and he killed in the accident, or what you want to call it. He killed 3 people died. At the end of the day, 3 people are dead, JMU students. And he had a plea agreement, and the plea agreement said he will serve 90 days in jail, 90 days. 30 days for each person that died, 90 days. And that's sufficient time. That plea agreement was accepted. 3 people, 3 parents lost their loved ones. And we're saying that's okay for him to have a plea agreement, whatever the circumstances are. We get it. You know, there's circumstances that we don't even know about because a plea agreement came out. We don't know what would have happened in the trial, but we do know that there were 3 people that lost their lives, and some jurisdictions said 90 days was enough time. So that's why I always bring those types of arguments to the board to say, I get it that, you know, at the end of the day, someone has lost their loved one. A woman has been raped and she's still traumatized after 25 years, 30 years. We'll never really understand a person's pain. But I want this board and any board to start to reconsider certain amount of time that a person is in prison, that you cannot continue to say 30 years is not enough time for a person who has committed a serious offense.
It also makes me wonder, like when you were saying that, is it like it's almost telling me that some lives that are lost are worth more than others, right? It's like, okay, for this life of this person that looks like A, B, and C, their life lost is worth 35 years, but this person is only worth 60 days. And that's another issue itself, like outside of parole, but obviously sentencing and accountability for the law and fairness behind the law. Before we move on to the next section, I wanted to get you to touch on, if we can, because it is a big area of contention right now, public hearings, the wording around it, and when we're seeing it happen, and what the real sort of law says, and what the parole board have to do in terms of public hearings.
So I feel like the parole board has been able to decipher and to find a loophole in that public that laws that's centered around public hearing. And honestly, I can't debate them, right? But the loophole is, if the board is inclined to grant parole, that's when you'll get a public hearing. So what we have discovered, and trust me, I'm challenging this right now, right? The board, and remember, I got to say this too, right? What I find with the board is that they change things to meet the law, but they haven't put it in policy. So that's why we have a little bit of a hard time challenging, because they don't have any written documentations. But what's really happening with the public hearings is that the board is taking what they consider to be a preliminary vote, right? They're voting individually, and when they see that the person has that needs 3 votes, that have met the threshold of the 3 votes, then they are going to do a investigation just to make sure that this is the right case to be moved to the public hearing. And once they do that, then they put the person on a docket and say that the person will be moved to a public hearing. And of course, if they have a homicide crime, you need 4 votes. So until the person gets 4 votes, then they'll be moved to the public hearing.
Okay, so you're in just to really clear it up for the audience. It's really, if the board is, like you said, inclined to grant, they're going to pull the individuals to have that public hearing. So in essence, not everybody is going to be entitled to a public hearing.
That is correct.
As like a lot of people, including myself, I know me and you have many conversations about that, but including myself, I was under the impression that every individual who was eligible for parole would be granted a public hearing, and that basically that fair chance to present themselves in front of the board and not just the investigator.
Absolutely. And when we heard of the law, we were excited because we thought that's what it was going to be. And then on top of it, the board changed a policy where advocates and family members and even attorneys were given an opportunity to meet with the board. Then they took that away from us, right? So we were thinking, well, the reason why they took that away was because they were going to start to use that time to interview more people. And so we were excited. I didn't even push back on that because I normally fight the board for certain things like that, right? But I didn't even fight the board because I was thinking, wow, what a great opportunity for the board to start to meet with applicants, right? And even if you listen to this, right, it's, and this is what upsets me the most, is that in the parole board public hearing, you will hear a board member says, I voted to not grant, but because of the interview and because of how you did, I changed my vote to grant. And so then we started to think about, well, what about the people that you voted to not grant that you never gave an interview to? You never gave them the opportunity for them to come in and present themselves in front of the board. So you automatically voted to not grant them. But if you had the opportunity to interview them, you might have voted to grant. So it's like, you know what? How do you really say that it's fair and you're being fair in this system? Because it's not fair when you don't even make it to a public hearing to give me the opportunity to show you who I am, to express remorse to the victims. I tell the board all the time, right? I challenged the board in a certain situation because there were cases that we were representing that was taking an extremely long time to move to the grant phase, right? And even after we got the denial, we saw that out of the 3 necessary votes to be granted, we got 2, right? And so in my appeal, I said, well, if the board members had given these particular cases the opportunity to meet in front of the board, who would have known if that one board member might have changed your mind, because they would have had an opportunity to meet the person. And I will say something. I have to shout out one board member. I said I wasn't really going to do this, but I feel like I have to do it. Mr. Sam Boone has been taking the opportunity, and I think he's done a really good job in literally going to the prisons, right, and interviewing these applicants and these candidates. And because he's taken the time to interview, you see the numbers are consistent with him voting to grant. And we had hoped with the law that was passed that that's what the board would have been doing. We wanted to see more board members take the time to interview. And then there's something that was changed from Governor Youngkin and Chair, at the time he was Chair Chadwick Dotson. They had an executive order. And again, we were very excited about this because when Dotson was the board member, he was taking the opportunity. The whole entire parole board was meeting on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, weekly, from 9 a.m. to whatever time they stopped. They were taking a pool of cases and they were going through the cases and they were talking about it. And, you know, if one member was inclined to grant, they would explain why the case should be granted. And then they would almost like really advocate for the person to be released. And we found that under Dotson, you had more grants and you started to see the numbers increasing. Unfortunately, you know, he says fortunately, unfortunately, he moved up and he's now the director of prisons. But we saw under Dotson, those numbers were looking good for Governor Youngkin administration, that they were moving to grant, and they were not really, you know, being biased. They were granting release to juveniles, old timers, fishback. We did see some numbers that were extremely low. That was concerning to us. They were not granting parole to people that had committed any type of sex offenses. And of course, we challenged that as well, because we think that you should not discriminate against any kind of crime, that you really should look at the person and the rehabilitation of that case when you're making a decision to grant, especially because we know it's a public safety issue. But Youngkin ran on a platform that said he was going to make the board more transparent. He said that he was going to do things where the board members were not voting in secrecy, that the board members were taking opportunities to talk, and they were interviewing and they were talking to victims and they were talking to advocates and lawyers and family members and things like that. And even they were talking to the Commonwealth attorneys that would weigh in. And believe it or not, some Commonwealth attorneys are better than others because they don't mind supporting a release, because, you know, once you serve a certain amount of time and there's no real victim opposition, Commonwealth attorneys have written support letters. We know a few that have supported some of our cases. So again, we were, you know, extremely welcoming to the changes because we thought that this would be a more transparent board. We thought that, you were going to see the grant race, and then there would be no issues because then they were doing everything right. You hear the saying, they were dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and there would be no pushback because you were following the policies and you were doing the right thing. But it's just really disheartening that after, the regime changed and the numbers started to plummet. And month after month, we started seeing 0 people being granted, one person being granted. And of course, we celebrate those people that are being granted, but we also call it out to say that you should have more people to be granted, because why is that particular person able to be granted? And if you take the record against someone else, you can see that, they probably had the same rehabilitation. So what made that grant happen for that month? But we think the numbers are extremely too low. The month of April, we saw, I think, about 6 people granted. I have an issue with April because 2 people that were placed on the public hearing docket that had moved to the public hearing for whatever reason. They were supposed to be seen April the 9th, and by April 23rd, they were taken off the docket. So we're challenging that as well, because it's not fair that a person had acquired the preliminary votes. And let me go back to that for a second, right? Because there's no policy about preliminary votes. That means the person had acquired the 3 votes necessary to be granted, right?
Wow.
You can't just erase votes; they go in. And if you think about the election, this is what Trump said. He was like, oh, don't count those votes. Let's recount them. No, that's not how this works. Once you put a vote in, it's locked in. And if you don't want to lock in a vote, because, I did a FOIA request, right? I know how to use the freedom of information, and I got it. I got the 3 votes. Three board members voted to grant. So at that particular time, what I have said to the board is the 2 people that had made it to the docket, they should have still gone through the process. Now, we couldn't make you vote to grant. If something had come up, let them face it. Tell them what it is that you're challenging, because we've seen in the public hearings that they've challenged some people for some of the infractions. I watched a public hearing where the applicant insisted, I did not use a real gun. I used a BB gun. And even Chair West was like, if you're lying and it's a really real gun, I'm going to pull your parole. Okay, so why did these 2 men all of a sudden get denied parole without being able to have a public hearing and really talk about it, question them? I mean, I think we embrace transparency. We want the board to be transparent. If something came up, I embarrass them, right? I don't care if you embarrass them, but put them out there and tell them what it is that came up for them to be able to defend themselves, right? And if you find that they lied or it's not true, then, you can say, listen, I'm not going to grant you parole. I take my vote back, but let's be transparent about the things that the board is doing. And, we commend the board when they do really well, but we also call them out when they don't, right? I've heard people talk about accountability. My clients keep me accountable, right? They're going to hold me accountable for the things that I commit or I say that I'm going to do. And my clients are hard on me when I drop the ball. I apologize, I fix it, I course correct, and I come back and I do what I'm supposed to do. And all we're saying to the board is we want to support you. We believe in public safety. Of course. I mean, I'm a mother, for crying out loud. I have 3 children. I'm hopefully one day I'll have grandchildren. I want to live in a world that's safe, but I also want to live in a world that we can I want to live in a world where we can show that public safety is important, but we also believe in forgiveness. We believe that a person can go to prison and do the time, and within that time frame, they can be rehabilitated and have an opportunity to come home and resume themselves. And one thing I have to say, and then I'll come back and you can ask me some more questions. The justice impacted people, that is all around, right? When they're given another opportunity, they're shining, right? I have met people that have been incarcerated and they come out, and now I have to call them doctor, because you know why? They have come out and they found their purpose and they give back to the community, and to me, they're scholars and they deserve to be called doctor. Whatever it is that they have done and they have earned, I am going to give them that respect. Period. right?
Yep.
Because they
Yep.
have come out and they have found their purpose. And even like Paul Taylor, I know those are common names, and Prince, and Azima Jeed, and Anthony Gomez. I mean, there's so many people that have committed crimes. They own it, they accept responsibility. But when I tell you they came back out to in the community and they're saving children's lives, they're going in the trenches, they're advocating, they're changing laws, they're speaking up. I mean, these
Right.
men and women are so committed to making sure that our community feels safe. Why would you not want to release other people? Why would you not do it?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't you want more of them?
I'm
Yeah.
not going in the trenches. I'm not going. I'm just not
Yeah.
doing it. That's not my role. But these men are so committed, and these women are so committed to their community. It's time for us to recognize that, and it's time for us to really embrace them and give them an opportunity to come out. People were taking plea agreements. People, snitching. People are telling and cooperating. Man, you're not giving them any time. But the people that are in prison, that are using their prison time, and they're doing things, and they're starting nonprofit organizations, they're writing books, they're going to school, they're going to college. Why would we continue to turn them down time after time after time to say you're not ready to come out to society? They're doing great in there. You need to let them out so that they come back into and contribute as citizens in the community.
I agree.
I absolutely agree with that.
You're going to move on, Sarah, to theme 2.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about barriers, denials, and fatigue. Let's talk about the blocks that get in the way. We know that the current approval rates are incredibly low. You just mentioned that it's at 1%. Even with strong cases and positive institutional records, denials are still common, very common. Why? Often it's things that are like outdated institutional charges, missing paperwork, unsupported opposition from victims, or even vague risk assessments, right? These denials take a real emotional toll. When someone hears no again and again after doing everything right, it leads to what many call hope fatigue. Karen, what are some of the barriers you've seen, and how do they affect people inside and their families?
We started this nonprofit organization because we find that there's a lack of representation. And representation doesn't necessarily have to be an attorney, or a law professor, or even a politician, or even an advocate. We feel as though, and one thing I love about my wives, right, and my loved ones, is you guys know what to do, right? And I feel like if there were more people that would reach out, that can articulate themselves, can express themselves in these parole hearings, and just say, hey, listen, I'm familiar with you, I know your case, let me help you organize so that we can take you in front of the board. I find that more people would be successful. People have asked me, how am I successful in the things that I do? I think my success comes because it's not about Karen Morrison. It's not about me, right? It's about being able to humanize a person, being able to say, you know what, I see you. I understand. I never condone any violence. It breaks my heart that, a young person felt like taking a gun and shooting someone. Like that's horrific to me, right? But what I want to be able to do, and I tell, like, again, just shout out to the wives, right? Shout out to the girlfriend, shout out to the mother, shout out to everybody. If you can just help your loved ones to prepare better for the board, right? I feel like that is the barrier that's missing. So oh my gosh, shout out to the people who have come out of prison, that have given back to multiple organizations, not just mine, but multiple, and say, listen, what can we do to help you? Because one of the things that we have done is we have people like Benjamin Spell, we have Taiwan Briscoe, we have Kevin Newman. I can name a bunch of them, right? Anthony Gomez again. I mean, just people, Paul Taylor, that come back and say, Karen, what can I do to help you? And Daniel Ford, and we get them on the calls, right? And we say, listen, help them to learn interviewing skill. It's almost like you're going for a job or you're going for a college application, right? How do you go in front of the board? How do you present yourself? Like, sit up tall, like, don't be slouching. Like, really go in there and start to talk. And we call it polishing the applicant off. You have to go in there. I love my fellas, right? And when I start to talk to them, be like, yeah, I was able to do this and this and this, and I did all of this and this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Let me ask you a question first. Let's start off. How do you feel that you took someone's life, right? So I kind of turn them around a little bit. Yes, we want to know that you went into prison. Why would we not want them to feel proud? But you're in prison because you committed a crime. You are convicted of a crime. So can we let's identify that. Let's get that out the way. But please express yourself first. Some family member is not happy with you having parole eligibility. Right. How can you express yourself about that? Can you just, I've heard, some people say, don't use the word apology. Don't use the word remorse. Don't use the word regret. Don't say poor choices. I don't get it. Like, there's no right or wrong answer. If it's in your heart to say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. If it's in your heart to say, I'm remorseful, I'm remorseful. I had a female client that I would have never known she loved the Lord. I would have never known she had committed her whole time in prison to be a servant to God. And someone told her, don't talk about it. And I'm thinking, why? If that is who you are today, if you're Muslim or you found the faith or whatever it is you are that has transformed you, why would you not talk about it? Because then what you're doing is you're holding back and you're not expressing to the board who you are. If I came to prison because I broke my mother's heart, right? And my mother is now incarcerated with me. She's doing the time with me. Why would I not go in there and say, not only am I sorry to the victim's family, and of course, say the victim's name, but I'm also sorry to my family. My mother did everything that she could possibly do. My mother was a single mother. My mother had 5 children, whatever she did, but I made the choice to hang out with the wrong crowd. But I want to say that I apologize to my mother or my sister or my loved ones, and use the opportunity to be real and express remorse. And then you can say that while I've been in prison, I have taken the opportunity. Not only did I take what's in prison, like we understand as breaking barriers, thinking for the change. Like I hear it all the time, right? That's my fatigue, right? But they have gone outside. And like I tell people, if you read 80 books, why are you not telling the parole board you read 80 books? Or I have a manuscript that I've written that has not been published, but I have a manuscript that I've done and that I would love to talk about it. I always say his name wrong, but my inspiration came from a gentleman by the name of Shaka Singhor, right? When I first started, I would only do nonviolent advocacy. I wanted to help people with nonviolent crimes. Because I just didn't have the experience. First of all, I was a school teacher when I started, and I was thinking, how am I getting into this and trying to help people get out of prison? Like, I don't know nothing about this. I've never went to law school. I'm not a paralegal. Never even took one class in paralegal, right? I've read books. I tried to teach myself to pass the LSAT, didn't pass the LSAT. And so I didn't go on to law school, but I just had a genuine desire and compassion to want to help people who made serious mistakes. I made mistakes in my life, right? And I just wanted to be able to help people have an opportunity to come out. And so I started saying, tell me your story. And I can write stories. I wanted to be able to write about what were you feeling in that moment that you killed Tammy Sue? And we get them to open up and they can admit that I was angry. But I made the worst mistake or the worst decision in my life when I allowed my anger to commit, this crime where I took the love of my life away. I'm the reason why she's not here. And I understand I deserve to be punished because I prevented her from being a wife. I prevented her from being a mother. It's real. It's raw. It's emotions. And I can't imagine that a board member couldn't feel that, the sincerity in a person's voice to know that, you know how hard it is to say, I murdered someone. These men can't say it. It's difficult for them to admit that I committed a murder. I'm the reason why this man did not go home to his mother or his father, his wife. They carry that. And I think the board, sometimes I think the board doesn't understand that they have trauma, right? They're feeling like they're the reason why someone lost their loved one. Do you understand the pain that they're carrying? But the board thinks, well, they're the worst person. They're monsters, or they deserve. In the heat of the moment, something happened. And I mean, you have guns everywhere. I was talking to somebody today, and they were like, they didn't even realize how easy it is for a 16-year-old to get a gun. And I'm thinking, yeah, no, it's, and you put these guns in these kids' hands, they don't even know how to shoot. We're not taking them to the range to shoot. I got a case in Ohio where the gentleman found a gun in like a yard. He didn't know anything about it. He he was like 17 years old, pointed the gun and went off accidentally. And he's in prison now. This his 25th year. And he did the right thing. He confessed to the crime. He said, I did it, but it was an accident. And instead of them writing the word accident there, they just said he confessed to the crime. And 25 years later, he's still in prison with a lot of trauma. And I think that, one thing I've always heard when we go to these meetings, I love it when people speak out and say, you know what, there's victim trauma, but there's also the offender's trauma. And, we were on a call the other day, and they were, a group of ladies. I'll, shout them out because I feel like they're really great. Don't get me wrong, I always get the letters wrong, but CFSY, right? And they were talking about restorative justice, healing, being able to get the victim and the families together. Because I think if the families understood that someone committed a crime and it has carried the weight of it has carried with them for the rest of their lives while they're in prison, I think some of these healing would start. And I think the board would really see that, they're not bad people. They made some really poor choices. They got involved. Drugs is everywhere. People smoke and they get high and they drink and stuff like that. And by the time you know it, you don't even know what you're doing. Some people black out and commit these crimes. Like, it's a lot going on. But I feel like, what, I probably never want to be a board member because I don't even want their tasks. But I think if I was ever a board member, I would really unpack it. They'll probably be like, Karen, you only looked at one case for the whole week, because I would be doing a deep dive into these cases to really understand what happened and what have they done in prison. I see board members looking at 10 cases in one day. I'm still thinking how you can look at one case in one day, because I got to read. Can you give me the trial transcripts? Can I read some of these victim impact letters? How am I making decisions about people's lives in 30 minutes that I could just go through and check? No, not grant. Like, I need to know. I need to know more about it than the case that just a narrative.
Yeah, I agree. Right. I think as well, like you talk about, like viewing over sort of, I guess, whatever they're provided. If a person that's going up for parole doesn't have somebody helping them, what is being submitted to the parole board? Is it just the counselor's report? Like, are most people not even doing their own packet to supplement what they're doing internally? Because like you said, there's people writing books. There's people, I have a guy that, isn't eligible for parole, but is going up for a pardon. And he actually went through an overdose, right? So he had a drug problem when he came in. He has quite a lot of time, and he looks at that like they won't even consider me. And I say, that is your strength. That is your power. I think it's even more powerful to go, no, I don't have a clean record, but look at how I've changed. And so unless he submits that, say he was eligible for parole, the counselor is not going to write that in that narrative. They're just going to give the basic paperwork that they have to the parole board. What are you seeing, I guess, like people that are coming up and maybe coming to you after their 5th or 6th time going up for parole? What are you suggesting to them that's extra that they're taking with them?
And let me say this. One thing about Virginia, they have a really good space. That's the one thing I could say that I've seen. You have law schools, law students, you have great professors that, do the clinics and everything else. And I went to a seminar, I guess you would call it. And a former board member was like, listen, why are the HBCU schools not getting involved? Why are they not having clinics? Why are people of color not more involved? Why are the faith leaders not organizing these advocacy groups to come in? I mean, like, we need to get more hands on deck to, Karen Morrison is overwhelmed. I'll be the first one to tell you. These guys will tell you. They're like, man, Karen got a lot of cases, but I get a lot of cases because it's a lot of need for it. And my heart breaks to even say no. Like, I know I've extended myself way too much, but how do you say no to a person that says, I need your help? Right. And so going back to the counselor, there are some counselors that have come in and they have helped. They will help the guys fill out the packets and really express themselves. And we really appreciate those counselors, right? And then again, I'm going to keep shouting out my wives and my girlfriends and my mothers and stuff like that, because, one thing I have seen, they're really invested, and they'll write, the stuff out and edit it and correct it and everything else. And they'll be the ones responsible for sending those parole packets in. And we find that, again, it's like a job application. The more prepared a person is, the better they do. And the reason why we started a nonprofit, people don't understand, and I don't even try to explain it to them what I do anymore. But I have a lot of pro bono cases where people been in prisons like 30 years, and I never charge them any money. I don't do that. I'm like, I have shown up on people's kiosks and say, listen, I saw your case, and I read, and I thought you were so close to getting granted. Can I take your case? And I'll take it. I'll just take it. And I feel like, preparation is the key. And I was so excited, and I'm still going to reserve my opinion about Lawrenceville. When Lawrenceville said that they were going to have a parole prison, my mind went wild. I thought, man, how beautiful this is going to be. They're going to have workshops. They're going to teach these guys how to interview. They're going to have people that's going to help them to put a parole packet together. I started getting so excited about Lawrenceville because I thought, wow, this is going to be it. This is the vision. This is where you're going to start to see a whole bunch of these old timers, these juveniles, these fishback cases, these geriatric parole. Man, you're going to see a whole bunch of people coming out through Lawrenceville. And I won't even say what I feel right now. The vision is still there, though. Somebody going to do it.
I mean, I feel like, to her credit, Amber Leak has an amazing vision. I think she is very much restorative justice focused. She, planned and put through and designed the victim impact program. And I know that all of us here are big proponents of that program. I think that it needs to be offered more often. I think the guys and the women get so much from that program, and I want to take it. Like, I want to take it just as a person to understand victimology and victimization and how to use appropriate wording and to be sensitive. I would also like to see more people coming out of Lawrenceville. And I have quite a few guys that I advocate for and with, and there's some on our team that, all I'm kind of hearing from them is the counselors aren't equipped with resources, and that they're very much encouraged to put forward their own programs and deliver their own programs. But in terms of getting ready to go home or being more prepared to go home, I feel like that's a gap right there. And I was the same. I was very dubious when they changed Lawrenceville over, and I was like, okay, there's either one of two ways here that this is going to go. Either it's a great idea and it's going to grow into something, or there's some sort of behind the scenes arrangement with the parole board to specifically release more people from this prison to up the numbers, which we haven't seen. So it's got to be number one. Right. So I think that the idea is great. Don't get me wrong. But I think they definitely need more, let's get Patricia West out there to meet with the guys, talk to them about what they're looking for, talk to them about the things that they see that they want to see that they're not seeing.
Well, can I just interrupt real quick? So one thing about Lawrenceville, shout out to the men at Lawrenceville, right? Because they have organized it in such a way that they have been able to bring people back into the prison, like Troy Ketchmore, right? Azim Majid. I've seen Anthony Gomez. I've seen, shout out to Nicole Dale, who's now have come into the space and is doing a really good job. She's taking cases like from left to right to be all hands on deck. So shout out to people like that. Latanya Roberson, who's now like working with Fighting for Freedom, that's come in as a volunteer to help me get these parole packages together and these conditional pardons. But the men there have organized in such a way that they're doing that parole peer group, support group, that they're helping the guys to interview, that they're, I don't know as far as the writing part and putting the packets together, but from what we're seeing is that they're really trying to help the guys with their interview skills. And they're really trying to, I mean, I have heard some really good, like the buzz that like men who have been through them, even though they're not getting denied, which is cool, you know, but they're still helping other people to say, listen, why don't I do a mock interview with you when I do a mock practice? So listen, I always feel like, you know what, you may have a vision, but if the vision is just not there yet, one thing about our people, right? And I'm talking about the space, not racial composition, but this space. Justice impact people will be able to do things with no money. And what's happening in Lawrenceville is they understand that there's a deficiency right now, but those men are reaching out to the streets and they're saying, listen, Karen Morrison, come in to the prison and do a support group. Like I've been to Beaumont, I've been to St. Bryce. I've really talked about that. And I've sat with them in a space, and we've just talked about what do you need to do to get parole. And trust me, I'll tell you in a heartbeat that there are people that don't even have advocates, don't have a lawyer, don't have anybody that's gotten parole. Because at the end of the day, it's sincerity. It's what's in the heart. They know how to go in there and answer questions and just be honest about themselves. And they are doing it too. And they're getting parole. I always tell my and this go back to the question about Sarah and fatigue, right? How do you keep a person uplifted? And the board, if they're listening, they're gonna be mad at Karen Morrison. But I'm like, it's not you, it's them, right? It's because at this particular time, we don't know what's causing the board not to grant. You know, we don't know what is being said to cause the board not to see what we see. And I tell you know, and people call me all the time, and they don't have to be Karen Morrison's client, but we talk and we listen, and you know, they're down, and I'm like, it's not you. You keep going. And then again, going back to Sarah's question, how do you help a person that's denied constantly, and this is their 15th time or their 16th time, and it's almost like my teacher hat comes on, and I tell people all the time, and I've heard a board member say this, right? You may consistently get 3 no's, but you keep doing it and you keep showing up, and you don't be angry. Don't regress. Don't give them what they want, but say, I didn't get it this time, but I'm going to go in there the next time and I'm going to really do something. Maybe again, course correct. If you know that you went in and you were so tired the night before you had a parole hearing and you totally bombed the interview, unfortunately, you have to wait a whole year before you go back in there. But from that year, what have you done to show the board that this time you're different? Or think about it yourself. Again, those people that don't have someone helping them, sit down in your corner and think about, what did you say in your interview that did not get the parole board's attention, that you didn't even make it to a phase where, you know, I think the hardest part is getting denials in 7 days.
Right.
Or 14 days, because there's something that came up that the board didn't even want to listen to you. And the hardest part is having a person, and I could tell you about why this happens. I'm going to tell you why. Having a person deferred for 3 years, it's apparent why a person is denied for 3 years, because they won't take responsibility for the crime. And people who are, to me, and this is my opinion, people who are given a 3-year hit has gone into a parole hearing and made themselves the victim. The board cannot stand that. And those are the cases that we find, and it's not all of them, but the cases that we've identified and looked at, I've asked like why do you think you got a 3-year deferral? And they're like, well, I went in there and I told them this and I told them that. And I'm like, okay. And what you told them wasn't correct. You cannot go into a board hearing and make yourself the victim. Never do that. Like, that's an absolute no. You're not the victim, right? At all. Even if you feel like you're railroaded and you're innocent and you spend the time, like I try to tell again, cases like I know that there are people that are in prison, but parole is not the place to relitigate a case.
Yep.
They don't want to hear it. The board members, I've been on a board that a board member has said, if you're going to continue, if you're going to continue to talk about innocent, you might as well let me hear from someone else.
Yep. Because they're not qualified to make that decision, right?
They're not qualified to make that decision. They have not, they're like Karen Morrison. They ain't go to law school. They're not paralegals. You know, you got to listen to the dynamics of the board. They don't know what they're taught is that they have a conviction, and every person that has a conviction is convicted, right?
Yeah.
And more than likely, in their minds, that person has committed the crime. They're not equipped to try to tell you if you're guilty or innocent. You have to use the pardons office if you want to do that, or you have to use the court of law. So even if we have a person that's innocent, we tell them parole is not the way to do it. Just say that I go in there and I accept the conviction. I'm not using this time to relitigate the case, but I want to show you who I am and why I would be a safe person for you to release into the community. Always express remorse, because whether you committed the crime or not, there's a victim in the crime, and you must feel some type of sympathy for a person that is harmed, and for you to have to carry that conviction. But some of these, you know, some of these applicants for parole go in there and they will spend the entire time talking about why they're innocent and how they've been railroaded and how, you know, they're criminally prosecuted for a crime they didn't commit, and they get denied in 7 days, 14 days.
Yeah. Because that's not the point of parole. Parole is we take into account the conviction, we take into account who you are now, and we're deciding to release you despite that. It's not about turning over the conviction. It's not about considering the evidence or anything like that. And like you said, I think a lot of people say, you know, if you're trying to fight your innocence and for 30 years you've been saying you're innocent, don't go into a parole hearing and take accountability. Right. But you can acknowledge the victim impact. You can acknowledge, maybe you were there, maybe you were the driver, but you didn't shoot the person. Acknowledge that there was a crime that took place and someone lost their life. You don't have to say, I'm really sorry that I shot that person. If you didn't shoot that person, we're not asking you to do that. But what we're asking you to do is say, little Johnny lost his life, and I can acknowledge that someone lost their life. And based on the victim impact program and what I've learned about victimization, I can acknowledge how that has now impacted that person's family, that person's mother.
And I have learned, and I made the common mistake. I'm growing, you know, Karen Morrison is growing. I've learned to not diminish the roles of anybody anymore. I got a hard lesson recently from Chair West, who, you know, we had a client that went through the public hearing, and, you know, I'm like, he's the driver. The shooter came out, and she was like, I don't care if you're the driver, you know, the shooter, you're responsible. And it clicked. Because at the end of the day, we don't know who is identified in the least culpable way, because at the end of the day, everybody that's in this conviction is carrying a first-degree murder case, right? Or anyone who's convicted is carrying the second degree or whatever. They're not separating you. At the end of the day, when the board looks at it, they're not saying, well, you know, well, this person is not the shooter. The person they're looking at, he has a first degree murder case. And it's just so unfortunate, because again, I honestly think if I could help rewrite some of the legislation or talk to legislators, I want the board to understand felony murder. I'm absolutely against felony murder. I don't think that a person should be held responsible for someone else's crime. Right. But I understand how the judicial system works. They don't want to try to figure out who the shooter is, because if you have people that's not going to tell, and you have 3 people that you now arrested and no one is talking and no one is saying, well, Johnny's the shooter, you're going to charge them all for the shooter. But what happens in cases where you are identifying the person as the shooter? Some of these cases, they know who shot, but yet all three men or all four people are held responsible as if they're the shooter. And I have filed a pardon, which baffles me. I still can't figure this one out. The person who was guilty of as the principal in the first degree was acquitted, and the person who decided to cooperate and say, well, you know what, this is my role in the crime, they're carrying the weight of the conviction.
Yeah.
But you don't even have a principal in the first degree.
Yeah.
But again, if you have board members that if you ask, well, do you understand the difference between accessory and principal in the first and the principal in the second, and they don't even have the training, that's not what they're looking at. They're supposed to be looking at infractions, but again, it brings you to a wider scope to say, well, how are you looking at these cases if you're not even trying to look and see what the role of the person in each case has done? I think accountability is so important. How are you holding a person accountable, but then they can't say, well, I'm the driver?
Right.
It makes no sense to me.
What level of accountability do you expect from a person based on what part they played in the crime? Like, I think that's really important. And and I mean, hopefully we see those law changes, but like you said, this is the law that we have right now. And the Felony Murder Act means that there could be 5 people facing murder charges. And when they go up for parole, the parole board is seeing murder. They don't care whether you were the driver. They don't care if you pulled the trigger. You have a murder charge, and that's what they're seeing. And so they want to see the accountability taken. And I think we need to talk to what the law is, and maybe not so much as to educating the parole board or asking them, because we can't. But how about we educate the people going up for parole that this is what they're looking at? That's something valuable for the person that's going up for parole to understand, that when they're looking at the crime itself and who is culpable, they're looking at the crimes that you were convicted of. And just explaining that to somebody going up for parole is really key, I think, because they come in there going, well, they should understand that I'm innocent, or they should understand that I was just the driver. I wasn't even in the room when the person was killed. And explaining to them, well, that's not what's important here. What's important is that a crime was committed. Before we because I know that we've kind of touched on theme 3 already, Sarah. So before we move into the case that you wanted to speak on, Karen, I did want to grab up Darlene's comment here about how does a person go about getting into programs, and the amount of time left pushes them to the end of the wait list. I have some thoughts on this. I know that there's a bunch of people that have come home from prison that can probably comment on this in the comments, if you guys can as well. I've had some success with advocating for people getting into programs from the outside here, pushing in terms of programs. Often we do see this, right? We do see them get pushed back. Sometimes it is as simple as saying, you are preventing me from getting an education. And I've had people mention that they will get a lawyer involved if they need to. I've had people say that they have written grievances stating that they are preventing them from getting the education that they need to go out for parole, go in for pardons, or rehabilitate. Karen, have you had any sort of, wins in terms of encouraging your clients to get enrolled in programs with extensive time?
Yeah. So what we're finding is that there's and I think we recently reached out to see, but I had a gentleman that we were able to recommend. Don't quote me on the name of it, but like the Henry George Institute, where you can do a corresponding course. We know about that one. And then Kenneth Hunter, I recently connected with Mr. Hunter, and I think he's fantastic. He talks about how to help get people signed up for college courses, and even have gone as far as helping maneuver through the Pell Grants situation. But there's only certain prisons that have that. But what I find is that when you want to be educated, you're going to find a way. I have 2 clients that I'm going to shout out. Dr. Thomas Reed Bay. Did you hear what I just said? Dr. Thomas Reed Bay. He came in, and my understanding was he got his GED while he was in prison, gone on to have an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and he just completed his doctoral degree, and he's at Lawrenceville. And so we know that if he's able to do it, there's got to be a way for other people to do it. What you want to do and you're committed to doing, you're going to find a way. And then my female client is Katrina Brookins, and what she's been able to do is she has two associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, and she just completed a master's degree. And so, you know, there's people that's around, and you can write organizations. Like I had a young lady that asked me the same questions: how can she get involved with correspondence schools? And what I ended up doing was I gave her Kenneth's information so she could reach out. Because again, to me, I feel like you have to connect these experts. Karen is not an expert in trying to help people sign up for courses. And so what we do is you know, we point them in the directions of the experts that can help them. But also as a school teacher, I'm big in those remember those books like Computers for Dummies, or GED for Dummies, right?
Yeah.
And or even just a GED book. Like when I told you I was trying to go to law school, I never had a tutor. I ended up teaching myself. So I bought the LSAT books, and I used to just do the work myself. And so one thing I have always done is anybody who says that they're interested in taking a GED program but haven't been able to do it, I purchased the GED book. And whether it's new or used, it doesn't matter. They don't care. They just use the books, and what they do is they stay and they actually teach themselves, or they have someone that may be in the same cell with them that have passed the GED. Like again, it's just, you know, like the population, they're so resourceful, and they have teachers' aides, they have tutors in there, right? And you know, and they will take people who are struggling to get their GEDs, and they will tutor them. Again, this is something that I really wish that these prisons would do more for, and really let these teachers' aides who are certified or qualified or even have gotten a GED, because you got to remember too, there's people that's in prison that might have committed a white collar crime that are professors, right? Why would we not be utilizing them in the prisons? I don't, you know, some of these people don't even really want money. They just want to be able to do some work, right? Why not utilize what you have in the prisons to help them to set up little classrooms, or even, you know, the spaces? I've been in prisons, but I haven't been inside. So I don't know, you know, they've never taken me into where the cells are. I've never been able to do a tour like that. So I don't know the dynamics, but I'm pretty sure I've heard that there's gyms or there's cafeterias or whatever where that people do it. And as a school teacher, I remember we used to do after school programs, and my teachers would volunteer all the time, and they would stay back in the cafeteria, and they would take 6 people in a little group, and they would help teach them. And that's how they got better, so that they could pass the SOLs. And I know the prisons are so heavy with thinking that there's so much violence, but there are people that's in prison that really want to learn, and they really want to advance themselves. Why can't they find those type of resources and put those men together? But I've heard that they'll be like, oh, they're gathering, or, you know, all kinds of stuff that they doing, and they give these guys charges for trying to educate them. But again, you know, people say that these prisons are for rehabilitation or for corrections. Well, let's correct.
Yes.
An opportunity to advance. But you know, they always say knowledge is power, and they don't want to be knowledge. They don't want them to be knowledgeable, but they should. They should really allow people who have, you know, master's degrees or even bachelor's degree or whatever, come like they're in the prison, they're doing time. Let them utilize the skills that they have, and that's them giving back to the community. I just think that I don't know what the real solutions are, because I don't know which hand is doing what, but I just think that sooner or later, someone is going to recognize that prisons are $1 trillion industry. And that if we ever want to really truly end mass incarceration, that we really have to pour into the prisons. If we're spending all this money, like, what are we using the money for? Well, I know somebody just told me that they spent $10,000 on a bed.
Yeah.
You can spend $10,000 on a bed in a suicide pod, but you can't spend $10,000 to buy books and put it in a library, or put it in some place and help educate people. You're spending $10,000 on a bed.
Yeah. I agree, and we've done that. Like we've sent in books because there's been lack of books. Places like the Ride Up facility. I've worked with PRS workers, and we've done fundraisers where we've sent in 20 books on things like cognitive behavioral therapies, yoga and meditation, mindfulness, changing brain thought pathways, and things like that, and business principles. Business 101, entrepreneur skills. I've also copied and pasted some information in the chat for anybody that does want to look. Inmate Connection, they send brochures into these prisons in Virginia all of the time. They offer lifestyle courses, career courses, and general interest courses for $50 or 3 for $150. And they will correspondence course send these into the people inside. These are all external. Now, I know, $50 might be a lot for some people. Reach out to them and try and do a payment plan. Blackstone Institute do a paralegal course where they do $30 a month. $30 a month, right? And you will get a paralegal certification out of it. These are all specifically set up for people that are in prison, incarcerated, to be able to access these courses via correspondence. There are options out there. These guys get the information sent in. I've been approached by people inside that have said, hey, can you reach out to Inmate Connection? I've seen their brochure of courses available. Can you help me do it? So they know about them. And like you're saying, there are ways. If you want to do it, you will. And I guess this then feeds into preparing your own parole packet. You can request from your counselor to have your external education uploaded into Chorus. There are ways. You do not just have to rely on the programs that you do that are DOC mandated to have that reflected on your institutional record. You can go, hey, I did a paralegal course. Here are all the details. Can you upload it into my Chorus? And the counselor will. Hey, I've done these 3 courses on neuroscience through Inmate Connection. Can you do it on Chorus? And they will. You just have to ask. So it is, I think a lot of it is also that self-motivation and just knowing what to ask and how to ask it. Because a lot of counselors will plead the fifth and go, I don't know how to do that, or they've not had to do it before. So, reach out to people like us, reach out to people like Karen, reach out to people like you said, Kenneth Hunter, who is very versed on education and very versed on, and he's already walked that path. He's already been inside. To go, okay, well, when you go to your counselor, here's the words you need to use. Verbatim, here's what you need to say. Utilize those resources that are out here. I think that's super valuable. Thank you, Karen. Sarah, did you want to move on to now this specific case that Karen wanted to speak on? Perfect.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about advocacy, Tony Lewis, and what we can do. So this last theme is personal and urgent. We're highlighting a case of Tony Lewis, who was recently denied eligibility for parole despite everything he did to show readiness. It's the kind of decision that tells people it doesn't matter what you do, you're still told no. Cases like Tony's raise serious questions about how the parole board operates and whether public perception plays too big a role in what should be legal process. So what can we do? We can get involved. We can push for transparency. We can vote for people who believe in second chances, first and foremost. And we can stop treating parole like a privilege for the few. So, Karen, can you walk us through Tony's case and why it represents something bigger?
So Tony Edward Lewis entered prison at the age of 16. He's now 68 years old. When Tony was 16, him and I believe it was a total of 6 young African-American boys were accused of raping a woman in a laundromat. Tony Lewis and his brother did not have the financial means to fight the case. The 3 other gentlemen, they were young boys. They had the financial means and they were able to fight the case. And 3 of them were acquitted. And 3 were sent to prison. So Tony Lewis entered prison at the age of 16. When he turned 18 years old, there was an attempted escape in Southampton County Correctional Center. And during the attempted escape, an officer by the name of Officer Barnes was killed. The three men that was legally held responsible for the death of Officer Barnes was Michael Cross, Vernon Joe, and Tony Lewis. Michael Cross and Vernon Joe had the means again to hire a private attorney, which was William P. Robinson. William P. Robinson understood the case, and he knew that Michael Cross was the person who is responsible for the death of Officer Barnes. What he ended up doing was William P. Robinson delayed the case as much as possible, actually almost 3 years, because there was a debate about the constitutionality of the mandatory death penalty. Unfortunately, Tony Lewis did not have the means to do so. He was the first defendant that went up, and under a mandatory death penalty, Tony Lewis jury members only heard one thing. If Tony Lewis participated in the attempted escape and any person killed the correctional officer, he was convicted or should be convicted of first-degree murder, and the only punishment is death. So unfortunately, because Tony Lewis and some other people participated in the attempted escape, Tony Lewis jury members, and mind you, this was in 1975 when this happened. So Tony's identified as a Negro defendant with an all-white jury. The all-white jury convicted Tony Lewis of first-degree murder, and his punishment was death. During the debate about the unconstitutionality of the mandatory death penalty, a mandatory death penalty means that there's only one punishment, and it's death. There's no sentencing phases or nothing. It's just, if you convict them first degree, it's death. So he was convicted of a mandatory death penalty. His attorney did a motion to set aside the verdict. The judge took it under advisement. By the time Tony went for sentencing in April, Tony Lewis was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to death, and had an execution date. Again, and the same thing what happened with Vernon Joe, but his attorney at that time, because it happened a little bit later, set aside the verdict and they kind of froze it, right? They did not pronounce the sentence because on October 20th, 1976, and I think this is probably the part that breaks my heart. At the time, we had a governor by the name of Governor Mills Godwin. He knew about the mandatory death penalty, and he had an attorney general by the name of Andrew P. Miller. Andrew P. Miller advised the governor that the mandatory death penalty was going to be ruled almost the same of like the Furman cases, that a mandatory death penalty was unconstitutional. So he gave advice to the governor to say, commute the sentences of the 5 men that were on death row. In a letter to a constituent by the name of Mrs. Mann, she asked the question, well, why did you commute this death sentence of these 5 men? And the governor said, in light of the United States Supreme Court decision that the mandatory death penalty is going to be unconstitutional, instead of me giving them the opportunity to be retried or released, I commuted the sentence. And the reason why he commuted the sentence was because they did not have to apply for it and they did not have to accept it. So Tony Lewis, here we go again. The governor commuted his sentence, although he knew that there was a possibility that he was going to be released from prison or retried. So fast forward again, you asked this question earlier about like what happens when people just don't have the help. Tony Lewis didn't have the help. In 1988, when he thought he was going to become eligible for parole, he never interviewed. Nothing happened. So he was able to find someone that was on death row. And that person did a pro se motion arguing the point that Tony Lewis should be eligible for parole. The courts ruled that they were going to dismiss this without prejudice. Unfortunately, the person that was on death row was killed. He was executed. So Tony Lewis no longer had anyone to challenge or to fight for him. So fast forward to 2017, when Tony Lewis became 60 years old. Now, mind you, a 16-year-old has been in prison all this time without anyone to fight for him. When he became 60, Tony Lewis, under Terry McAuliffe's administration, became eligible for parole. He started meeting with the parole board, was denied. One year, he went up under Tanya Chapman, who Tanya Chapman voted to grant Tony Lewis parole. But that was the only person that voted to grant. In 2023, I came on board to work with Tony Lewis and his family to take him through the parole process. Tony Lewis was scheduled on May 23rd, 2023 to meet with the parole examiner. No one showed up. On the night of the 23rd, Tony Lewis called and he said, I don't know what happened. No one came to interview me. Mind you, the family and I scheduled for May 25th. So on May 24th, I emailed the board and I said, hey, I'm not sure what happened, but Tony Lewis did not have his interview. We're scheduled to meet with the parole board chair on May 25th. Can you please tell me what happened and can we reschedule it? On the 24th, I was informed that due to a computer glitch, Tony Lewis should have never been eligible for parole in the first place. That he's not eligible. He's condemned to die in prison. And I'm like, wait a minute, how is this possible? I did a FOIA request. I made sure I got some information before I was preparing this parole packet. And he's been going through the parole process. He's got votes. Board members has been voted on this case. So like, why are you going to tell me now he's not eligible? And so they're like, Ms. Morrison, I'm so sorry, because of a computer glitch, he's not eligible. So I think they thought that I was going to be one of those people that's going to be like, okay, well, so what? He's not eligible. I'm so sorry. I can't help him. That's not me. And so my fight started on May 25th. I've been arguing now for the last 2 years to say Tony Lewis is eligible. I've read both cases. Michael Cross, I got the child transcript for Michael. I got the child transcripts for Tony Lewis, found out everything, was able to have the opportunity to meet with Tony Lewis. And remember, we talked about earlier, a person who is eligible for geriatric parole, the way that they cannot be eligible is if they are convicted of a class 1 felony. Okay, well, in 1975, when Tony Lewis was indicted, he was indicted under the statute 53-291. Class 1 felonies did not exist at that time. Class 1 felonies did not become effective until October 1st, 1975. And guess what? The law was not made retroactive. So you cannot consider a person, under a class 1 felony if the law is not retroactive and it's not in existence at the time, right? And so I've been arguing for 2 years about how is this possible for someone to deem someone ineligible for geriatric parole when it is not a class 1 felony. I have proven my point, email after email after email. And so I started at the bottom, arguing with, the parole board administrator, with the legal, even with the attorney general's office who gave the opinion. And I really want to tell you this because I think this part is so important, and I'll fast forward because I could talk about this case all night. But what is so important that everyone has to understand is the power of the Department of Corrections. Can you imagine that they have the power at the lowest level to condemn someone to die in prison? You have a courts and legal manager, you have a parole administrator, and you have someone from the attorney general. 3 people spoke about this. The attorney general gave the advice, and what did I say? Advice, right? You have a court and legal manager that does the calculation of time and making a person eligible and ineligible. And then you have a parole board administration that is not even supposed to be in the conversation, but the 3 of them were in the conversation. And what happened was courts and legal never sent Tony Lewis any type of documentation saying that he is no longer eligible for parole. In fact, it wasn't until months later when I decided to, hey, let me call the prison and tell the prison, listen, there's an oversight. Can you please call and find out why Tony Lewis is not on the docket? And guess what they did in September? They put him back on the docket, right? So that tells me that there was nothing coded to say that he's not eligible, right? And so if nothing is coded and you put him back on the docket, this is where Karen Morrison made her mistake, because I should have not said anything. But because I said, okay, fine, we fixed the problem, he's back on the docket, let me go ahead and get my meeting. I get a letter from the parole board administrator that says, hey, let me give you an explanation about why he's no longer eligible. And the parole board administrator wrote the letter. And so that is what they use to construe that he's no longer. So, but guess what? The parole board administrator or the parole board chair cannot deem a person eligible or ineligible for parole. And they know that, but yet they have allowed this to go on since 2023. We're now in 2025. And so as I don't know, some people who are seeing my actions, I have started at the bottom and now I'm at the top. I've gone to the Attorney General's office. I only want to talk to the Attorney General. I've gone to the Director of Prisons. I have gone to the First Lady. I've gone to the Governor's office. I've tried to reach out to senators and delegates. Not one senator, well, let me take that back. One senator, Mamie Locke, has tried to help me. One senator has tried to help me. Everyone else is like, Karen, just wait till the Democrats come back in. When the Democrats come back in, we'll take this case on. Well, as we waited, Tony Lewis' mother, who was 90 years old, died over Thanksgiving. His brother died in the same week. So as people think that we should keep waiting, his mother, 90 years old, has been waiting for her son to come home, died during Thanksgiving. The brother died during the Thanksgiving week. The family, their sisters that are so crushed and devastated because they're thinking like, what happened? Their brother is now again condemned to die in prison after finally having hope that there's a possibility that he could come home. And you have people at the top agency levels who know that we're right. I have talked to law scholars. Anthony Gomez has helped me with this case. We have talked, and they all acknowledge. I even have a former governor that has taken a look at the commutation and says the commutation says life imprisonment. And you still have an administration that keeps saying, well, Karen, just be patient. We're going to take a look at this and we'll give you an official letter. I have talked to the Secretary of the Commonwealth and I've asked her, please interpret the commutation, because if you look at the commutation, it says life imprisonment. Get this, it doesn't say life without the possibility of parole. It doesn't say anything but life imprisonment. If you have a sentence that says life imprisonment during the opportunity when you could have been eligible for parole, it's a no-brainer. He's eligible for parole. And yet, as of today, Tony Lewis is still condemned to die in prison. If Tony Lewis' situation is not changed, Tony Lewis is going to die in prison. That's my fight. A 16-year-old. And then real quick, what about the 16-year-old? They seem to not want to take that part up. He was 16 years old when he entered prison. Aren't there laws that protect the 16-year-old who went into prison? Like I keep hearing, oh, he's 18, he's 18, he's 18. Well, he was 16 years old when he went into prison. He never left. So do we not even address the fact that he was 16 years old? He has a sentence that they're constituting that he entered prison with. And are you trying to tell me that there's no laws on the books now in the state of Virginia that's going to protect the 16-year-old from serving a life without the possibility of parole? He has no parole. And then he's a principal in the second degree, if that much. The person.
And we have juvenile parole now as well, which should apply, right?
Which should apply, but they're saying it doesn't apply because he has an 18 years old when he was sentenced to the death penalty. So they're not considering the 16-year-old at all. It's like it's non-existent. They're only looking at the 18-year-old. And I'm saying, no, he was 16 when he entered. You cannot just arbitrarily say that because he was 16, he has no rights to protect him. Right. He has rights. He's a 16-year-old entered prison at 16. He has rights. And so Virginia has its case again. And this is why I'm very vocal. You have a 16-year-old who entered prison and has never left and is 60 years old. And he is condemned to die in prison. Someone says, why doesn't the juvenile parole apply? Because what they're saying is that the 16-year-old sentence doesn't matter because it's what he did at the age of 18. And because he was sentenced to death, they don't count the 16-year-old sentence. That's their explanation.
Right.
And who's challenging it?
Right. That's the key, right? Who's going to tell them that they're wrong? And it needs to be someone above them. So how can, this isn't my wheelhouse, Karen, okay? And a lot of people, this is not their wheelhouse. So how can we support Tony?
Well, we could start emailing the chair of the parole board, right? She to me, she what I try to tell the chair of the parole board is because you wrote a letter, your parole administrator under you at the time took it upon herself. And I have an email where she says, well, Karen, I thought that, you would have gotten a response from the courts and legal or from the AG's office. But since you didn't get a response, I'm writing an explanation. So the parole administrator took it upon herself to give us an explanation. And then later on, the parole board chair came in with a more in-depth letter and took it upon herself to write us a letter. But the Department of Corrections never wrote us a letter. They don't even have anything in writing. I just did another FOIA request asking for any memo or directives that they sent to the parole board chair, because I finally got an email now from the chair of the parole board saying that she never had the authority. Well, the parole board does not have the authority to make a person eligible or not eligible. This case is so heartbreaking because of the fact that it's so hard. And I totally, trust me when I tell you, I totally understand when people are innocent and they've gone 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 15 years, 5 years, 1 year. Can you imagine an innocent person in prison fighting, and you're saying, you got this wrong. You have an innocent person in prison. This is how I feel about this particular case. And we fight for innocent cases. That's why I really started the nonprofit organization, because I really wanted to be able to help people who are innocent that are serving sentences and they shouldn't have been here. And to have discovered this young man, 16 years old, and I had an opportunity to meet with Tony Lewis. I had to go to the prison, and I met with him, and he said to me, Karen, you're the only person that ever came. You're the only person that ever came to the prison to try to help me. And so it's so sad and it's so heartbreaking when you have people that's been in prison for so long and people have forgotten about them. And people ask me all the time, how do I do it or why I do it? This is my why. I believe in justice. I believe people should spend time in prison for crimes that they do commit, but I'm totally against people spending decades. Can you imagine? Tony Lewis has been in prison now for 52 years because in his mind, he thought during the escape that if he took a guard and put him in a cell and got him out of harm's way and left the building to go over to where his brother was. And it's documented in the trial transcripts that, that's what he thought. He thought that he was saving a life. And instead of him being a hero because of his color of his skin, they thought that he should be executed. And I will say something because I'm going to go on record today. We're so thankful. We have law students that have now come on to take a look at Tony Lewis's case, and they are working with, but unfortunately, they've broken, like, it's a semester, so they're off for the summer. And as we continue to wait, how many more days are going to go by where we have someone that's condemned to die, and Tony Lewis is now experiencing heart problems, and we can't wait. So I've reactivated my push to at least get them eligible for parole while we look at the bigger picture, because sooner or later they're going to have to look at the 16-year-old.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think it's and it makes me wonder how many more Tony Lewises are out there, right? Mm-hmm. You're here speaking on his behalf, but at the same time, there are so many people in there that just don't have the knowledge or the ability to understand where they've been wronged or where they can, get help from, or that they just don't have, like when we talk about support systems and we talk about the sheer misrepresentation of certain demographics in our prison system, there's a reason that certain people are in prison, right? It's because if we keep them stupid and we don't give them the information, then they're not going to fight. So we give them no information, we give them no education, and it's all by design. And so it's like, how many more of these are we going to allow to happen before we say, someone like Tony Lewis, if we fight for him, could be the precedent that then goes on to save 100 other Tony Lewises. And I think, obviously when they commuted this sentence, they couldn't foresee, obviously, the flow-on effects of this. But when you give someone a life sentence, it makes sense that they would just be under the law as per everybody else. Everybody else that has a life sentence will be eligible for parole and geriatric parole release. But would he not qualify for old law as well? Like, was this not done in the old law time?
Believe it or not, I'm not even arguing with them anymore because it's just pointless at this time. But Tony Lewis should have been eligible for discretionary parole. And then here's again the kicker, right? If you have I gotta keep this real, right? The Department of Corrections have taught me, I don't care what anybody says, because people are saying, well, Karen, why are you not taking this to court? Why would I take it to court when the Department of Corrections seems to have more power than a court, right? They listen, this is what they said about the second gentleman, Vernon Joe. I've already shown them. There is a commutation that is there for Vernon Joe. And you know what they said to me? This is what the Department of Corrections has said. They're saying, well, because his sentence wasn't imposed, right? Then the never counted, and the sentence that was imposed said life. But guess what? The documents that I bought everything because I had to be knowledgeable, right? The court order that comes and says per commutation is why he's serving a life sentence. So the Department of Corrections has been able to say whatever they want to say. And then I've even countered them to say, well, what about the Constitution, right? The Constitution of Virginia? Because the Constitution of Virginia clearly says that a governor can issue a commutation upon conviction. And don't we understand what a conviction is? A conviction simply means, right? A conviction simply means that the person has been found by a jury of his peers or by the judge, and they are convicted. It does not say in the Constitution of Virginia that they have to have a sentence imposed. Right. So the Department of Corrections has determined that this is what they're going to do. Just like how, again, people are saying, Karen, why don't you take this to court? But guess what? Under the Democratic governors, Tony Lewis was eligible. Not only was he eligible under Terry McAuliffe, but he was also eligible under Governor Northam. So you had two former governors that made him eligible for parole, but yet here we are with Governor Youngkin, and Governor Youngkin's administration says, well, no, he's not eligible. How's that possible? So are you trying to tell me two governors got it wrong? That's what you're saying. And this is what the Democrats are saying. They're like, Karen Morrison will help you. Just help us to get a Democratic governor back in. And more than likely we'll get a Democratic governor back in and they'll fix it without going to court, and they want me to take it to court. But I told them, why am I going to go to court? Because now we have to spend money to hire a lawyer. And you're going to have to spend money to hire a lawyer. Taxpayers are going to have to spend money to hire a lawyer to represent the Department of Corrections when we go to court. And what the judge is going to say is that parole is a privilege, right? But what we are doing is we're taking up the bigger issue, because in Tony Lewis 1977 court decision, when he challenged the constitutionality, they said that this is a moot issue because the governor commuted his sentence. So now what we're saying is that, well, do we have a constitutional challenge since the courts did not take it up, right? because now you can say, well, listen, this is now an issue. We have to probably take a look at this sentence and determine that at the time that he was convicted, there was a moratorium. There was a moratorium. People forget that from 1972 to 1976, even 1977, there was a moratorium. So I've always questioned, how did he even get indicted? Because his co-defendant who was going through, guess what they had to do? They had to null pros all of his charges under 53-291 and charge him under the current statute because the 53.291 was invalidated. Like this is when I want to go to law school and just be like, Tony Lewis, if you just hang on two more years, 2.5 years, I'll represent you, and you'll probably, listen, we not just going to ask for parole eligibility. I'll be asking for millions of dollars in compensation for wrongful incarceration.
Yeah, 100%.
I've been waiting for an attorney to call me and say, Karen, why don't we do a civil suit? Because Tony Lewis, and I don't want to just, because I don't want people to start to think that I'm just isolating Tony Lewis, and Tony Lewis is the only case that I have. I have to use my voice and I have to use my platform. There are so many people like Sarah Moore. I thank God for her because she's been with me. She's actually helped advocate with me. She's done so much. She's volunteered with us. She's helped me fundraise. And she has her husband that's in prison. And he's always accepted responsibility. And Sarah knows when my God, they denied him parole and they gave him the same arbitrary issues where it says that, he needs to serve more time. The crimes at the seriousness of the crime and release at this time would diminish. And so I challenge them. This is when I use my favorite lines that by a preponderance of evidence, you have not proven that Mr. Vega Board is still a danger to society. In fact, you contend that he is an ideal candidate because you have not identified that he has not taken the appropriate courses, that you have not said that he's not gotten like he's been infraction free. Like there's nothing on that side to show why he should be in prison. You have not done that. And we did win the appeal and they revoted and it came back with the same freaking denial. But to me, I feel like the three arbitrary reasons that they continue to use, and this is why guys get so frustrated and they do grievances and they do take them to court. But unfortunately, because these freaking laws in Virginia says that parole is a privilege and that, they don't really have any rights. Well, can the legislation take this up and say, when are we going to start to say that, listen, parole is not even so much a right, but it's something here to help to correct something to balance it out. Again, I'm going to always say to people that you have guys who will take a plea agreement. Look at the guy in Norfolk that took the plea for 8 years. 2 people lost their lives, and then you have someone that's serving life imprisonment for robbery. Life sentence for robbery, and is now on his 30th year for robbery.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think, the seriousness of the crime thing annoys me because it's like you said, right? The only thing that disqualifies you from parole is capital, is that class 1. So if you wanted to make certain crimes ineligible because they're so serious, then they should have been included with the class 1, as far as I'm concerned. If you want to sit there and say, release at this time would diminish seriousness of the crime, then don't give that person parole eligibility after 20 years. Because as soon as you say that person is eligible, as far as I'm concerned, you remove the ability to fall back on the crime because you're contradicting yourself. You're saying they can be eligible, but then we're going to turn them down because they haven't served enough time. Don't let them go up for parole then. Make them wait 40 years.
Oh, look, don't say that because they'll probably do it. Remember, that's the reason why they abolished parole, because they were like, listen, we don't want anybody going. They don't want anybody going up. It's so sad that they have abolished parole for these reasons. But what has to happen, I don't care what anybody said. I would tell you in a heartbeat, I'm a fan of Agent Bennett. I don't care what they said. Agent Bennett did the right thing when she stood up and she told the parole board, look seriously and go into each and every single case and you make sure that you understand. And what Agent Bennett did under her leadership was she was able to find cases case after case after case after case, and she's used parole as a system to start to release, to help to balance out the system. And I'm still waiting for another Adrian Bennett to come to the parole board and take the leadership, because at the end of the day, there is no reason why you can say that if a person has killed 2 people or killed 3 people and can do 90 days in jail. And I tell this all the time too. Even Governor Youngkin sent a message that was very clear to us, right? Mm-hmm. You have people that have filed pardons that have been waiting for years to get an answer. And a gentleman by the name of Wesley Shiflett, who, yes, he was charged with manslaughter. Yes, he was acquitted. I get all of that. But at the end of the day, he still killed somebody. He killed somebody. Yes, he was acquitted. I can't, I don't know what happened with that. But he was convicted for using a firearm recklessly, and had a 5-year sentence, and I believe 2 years suspended, and he had 3 days. I can't remember the dates right now. Normally I'm good with dates, but let's say on a Friday, the judge sentenced him to do like the 3 years in prison. On Sunday, this is what taxpayers use for their money. The governor and the secretary of the Commonwealth came to work on a Sunday, and by that Sunday afternoon, that man was released from jail, because Governor Youngkin felt like the sentence was disproportionate to the crime and released him from prison. Mm-hmm. And so what we're saying to Governor Youngkin is, if you feel so contempt to let someone who you feel, the sentence is disproportionate to the sentence, and you have that power to release, why are you not using your power to start to look? I probably could say all night. You did say we could talk all night, right? But we have LaTanya Robeson, who has been volunteering with me, and she's a godsend. Her fiance is reincarcerated because he had a misdemeanor DUI, first offense, right? Mm-hmm. The probation officer said she did not recommend reincarceration. She did not want him to go back to prison. Then on top of it, the Commonwealth attorney says, we'll take this plea agreement, and he's opposed to sending him back to prison. But yet the parole board came in and has reincarcerated Mr. Oles into prison. And now this is his 2nd year, going on into his 3rd year. So when does the governor step in and say something like that? We have brought this case to the governor's attention. There's a pardon on file. When does the governor come in and say that this sentence is not appropriate? You had the Commonwealth attorney that says, no, don't send him back to prison. You had the senior probation officer that said, don't send him back to prison. But yet the parole board decides to send him back to prison, and now this is his 2nd opportunity to go back up for parole. I just think that I don't know what the answer is. There's so many organizations that are underground, like the Humanization Project. Mrs. K, please forgive me. I don't know. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank, but Mrs. Lily Branch Kennedy, I remember the letters, RIHD, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have Interfaith for Human Rights that have some really great people that's on the ground trying to fight for solitary confinement. I mean, you just have so many organizations. You guys now have formed a nonprofit organization to come in, and we have been working and banding with organizations that are on the ground in Virginia trying to get these things done. And for some reason, no matter how many times people have advocated and tried to talk to this Secretary of the Commonwealth, have tried to talk to these parole board members, right? Mm-hmm. And saying, please, listen, we're going to take accountability. We're the community. We want to help people. You have pathways for re-entry. You have so many opportunities for people to come out, and we're saying that we're going to embrace them as a community, and we're going to help them to thrive. And the parole board still feels that they can't find ideal candidates. You can't find ideal candidates to release. Mm-hmm. You have 3,000 applications, and you can't find ideal candidates to release.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, there's no rhyme or reason. It's very much, and I don't know, I don't recognize his name, but is that guy that you're talking about, was that the police officer that killed the young black man?
Yes. You could say yes. That's him.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Because I didn't remember his name, but I remember seeing obviously what happened. And I think, for me, that just screams bias. It screams, law enforcement, and fair enough. Okay, the taking of the life, was acquitted, whatever, but he used a firearm in the commission of a crime. And I know men that are sitting in prison that have got 36 stacked years of firearm offenses for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And no one was killed. No one was killed in those instances. No one lost their life.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and Kirsten, what you're talking about is a system failure because the judges misinterpreted the firearm statutes. The judges did not realize that they can run these time concurrent, that if it was 2, a 3, and a 5 year, they could run it concurrent, and then everything else 25 years after didn't have to be on the books. And no matter how many times you file a pardon, no matter how many times you say that it's a misinterpretation of the law, that somebody needs to fix it, nothing is being fixed, right? And then I'll go and I'll talk about political parties. I try not to talk about politics when I do the work, but they want us to support them. They're asking, give us your vote. But I totally feel what people in prison feel. Like, we've given you the vote. We've trusted you before. The Democrats had full control, right? Before, if I remember correctly, and people were screaming, put parole eligibility for all back on the books, get a parole board that really works. And when you had the opportunity, you didn't reinstate parole. You let George Allen take away parole eligibility. And when I've met George Allen, and he's like, well, I thought that, this is what he said to me anyway. He said he actually believed that taking away parole eligibility and bringing in truth and sentencing laws was going to be better, because then simulated co-defendants would get the same time. Well, guess what? I don't know what happened, because these simulated co-defendants, they get 500 years. Did you think, was that your plan?
Exactly.
What happened to these sentencing guidelines that they were supposed to be using? You know how many arguments that I've used that the sentencing guidelines, when we helped Lawrence Stevens, and thank God that Governor Northam was the governor at the time, right? When we helped file his pardon petition, Lawrence Stevens took a plea agreement with the impression that he was going to do 13 years flat. Can you imagine an 18-year-old taking a plea agreement thinking that you're going to do 13 years flat, and by the time the judge sentenced you, you're sentenced to 3 life sentences plus 23 years without the possibility of parole? And Governor Northam took a bold step, and he took a brave step. I'm so appreciative of him that he understood the disparity that happened in sentencing. It didn't matter about color. It was what he asked. And I've said this to Kelly G on record. I said, Kelly G, you have a great director of clemency, Diana Fortune. She's excellent at what she does, right? Very professional woman. She will answer your question as long as you're authorized to speak on behalf of the person, but she goes above and beyond, always professional in everything that she does. You have Trudy Harris, the lead investigator, that is very thorough in her job. And you have parole officers and pardon officers and everybody working together. Why won't you use the staff that is being paid to do the job and say, listen, I want you to go in there. I have this power to pardon people, and I'm going to use it. Like I tell people, I'm not a fan of President Trump, right? But Trump just over the weekend pardoned the sheriff who had that bribery scam, right? For $75,000, I think. And he was supposed to go to prison for 10 years. Trump says, don't even go to prison. You're pardoned. I'm giving you an unconditional commutation pardon, whatever it is that he called it. Then today, I found out that he pardoned 2 other people. Well, actually, a total of 3. Trump is not afraid to use his power. And if these Republicans want people to continue to vote for them, okay, well, Trump is a president, right? And he has this power. Why not use the power to release? Mm-hmm. The parole board has the power, and I have respect for Chair West. I think Chair West is very intelligent. She's highly intelligent. And she was a judge, and she has the experience, and people want to trust her judgment. I think Chair West, if given the opportunity, I've seen her work. I've seen her do it. She will sit down and she would read a case, and she will take her time, and she's interviewed clients, and she has actually voted to grant. I don't know what it is that's going on and why they're afraid to grant, but I feel like, and I'm probably going to get some slack. People are going to say something about Karen Morrison, but every single parole board member that I have come across Mr. Banks, who's the vice chair. I probably was one of the first organizations that publicly supported Mr. Banks because I saw Mr. Banks come in. I saw him take his time. I saw him being very professional in everything that he's done. And I have no qualms with any board member. I think these people have what it takes to really grant second chances. And I wish that I had a magic ball to figure out what it is, because I've seen them vote on cases. I've seen them grant parole to lifers. I've seen them grant parole to people who have committed serious crimes. I've seen them put their names on these cases, and they've been on the board long enough to know that the people that they voted for early on have come out and, knock on wood, they have not reoffended.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I don't know what is holding them back. I don't know what's holding the Secretary of the Commonwealth back. I don't know what's holding the chair back, because every time I see Governor Youngkin and I talk to Governor Youngkin and I have talked to his wife, they look me in my eye and they tell me that they believe in second chances. So if you believe in second chances and you say you believe in second chances, then why are you not granting releases and why are you not granting pardons? And I will even go to bat for Jason Mieres. People have said something about him, but I will be the first to stand up for him, because when I bought him the Kashawn Duffy's case, and I bought him a total of 3 other cases. I did 3 at the time because I had 2 other guys that were actually and factually innocent. And I asked them to take a look at this case. I sent an email before he was elected, and I said, please take a look at these cases because you have some innocent men. And I recently just sent another case over. And Jason said to me before he was elected, he does not want innocent people in prison, and he will develop some type of, I don't know if it's a task force or whatever you would call it, to start to look at these innocent cases. And when we brought him the Kashawn Duffy's case, he said, or not him in particular, but he had someone from his office call me and say, Mrs. Morrison, we have read your email. We saw the bullets that you put forward, right? And that what we want to do is, if he has an attorney, he goes through the court case, we will join this motion and they will not oppose it. And Jason was a man of his word. And his office did not oppose it. And Kashawn Duffy was released from prison. And this was a sexual offense where a Black man was accused of sexually, to a minor. But he surprised me when he took the stance. And not only did he take the stance, but Kashawn came out and he met him. And so to me, I feel like, you know what, people are looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, why am I talking good about the parole board? Why am I talking good about, this administration? I'm a Democrat. I'm a diehard Democrat. But when people are in power that can do something great, I want to see them do something great. I want Governor Youngkin to be successful. Why would I want a governor to fail? Because if the governor fails, we fail. We lose 4 years of an opportunity to get people out of prison. This is a time, and you have so many organizations like you guys have just developed that are putting your blood, sweat, and tears into helping people get out. You're all the way in, where is it, Australia, right? And here it is that you're on a Zoom for 2 hours trying to do what you can to help people get out of prison. And no matter how much effort Sarah has done, she's gone to the General Assembly. She's gone with the Humanization Project. She's volunteered. She's like, look at my husband. I've committed my life to my husband, Vega. And, they've done podcasts. They've done a story in the newspaper where they're saying that he takes full responsibility for his crime. Just give him an opportunity. He was a juvenile, and yet he's still in prison. When do we say enough is enough? Why does it have to be the color of our skin is going to still keep us in prison? Trump wants us to forget about, and says, oh, forget about DEI, that we're all equal and blah, 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 blah. Well, we don't feel equal.
Yeah. He says it's based on, what does he say? What's that thing that he says? It's based on effort, not on color.
Yes.
Okay. So release everyone that has the effort then. Treat them all the same. Do not sit there and tell me, and I see it so many times. It is very different here. And I think that's why I have a special interest in the US, because the disproportionate sentencing on racial profiling is so extreme. And I have been exposed to understand my privilege, to understand white American privilege. And I see it so much in the criminal legal system when I talk to one man. And I'm not saying that there aren't white men sitting in the Virginia prison system that are being treated unjustly. There are many, and I fight for them just as hard as I fight for the Black and Hispanic men. But when we look at your determination based on whether somebody is being released, and we can so clearly see that you are treating white men and Black men so blatantly differently, we need to be understanding that Black and white is not part of the conversation. Black and white is not part of the pardon conversation. It's not part of the parole conversation. If you were to have nothing that identified that person as Black or white, and you were just looking at them and speaking to them, and you had a cloak in front of their face, release them based on who they are and their character.
Mm-hmm.
It has, man, there are so many Black men in those prisons that I learn things from, and I'm like, man, and out here too, right? And I put a post on my Facebook a couple of weeks ago saying, like, I have never felt more enlightened and educated and people being patient with me than in the Black community. I have asked questions, I've made mistakes, I've tripped up, I've said insensitive things, and they have been the most welcoming and patient people with me because I just didn't know. And so I want people to see exactly what you're talking about. If the effort is there and the intent is there and this person is working hard, and we know, for example, in Vega's instance, he was 16 and he took a life. Yes, a life has been taken, and that person doesn't get to live their life and doesn't get to have a family. But at the same time, let's understand Vega as a 40-something-year-old man versus a 16-year-old man, and acknowledge that at 16, he didn't have the ability to make that decision. It just wasn't there. And so at what point do you go, well, Vega, you have sat in prison in an environment where you've got really awful people and all of the odds stacked against you, and look at what you've been able to do anyway. Because there's people out here, and I say it all the time, no one works harder than a felon. No one. There's people in prison that have done things that people out here could only dream of or have excuses not to do. So
Absolutely.
If they can do all those things in an environment like that, then why aren't we giving them the chance? I'm mindful that we've been here for 2.5 hours. Yeah, right.
Let's do 15 more minutes, because I feel like we said that we had people that wanted to ask questions, and I've talked, and I don't know if they've been waiting patiently, but I do want to answer some questions. I don't want to have monopolized this time and not give people opportunities to ask questions so that we can answer. And I do want to thank everyone. I did not plan. I told Sarah and Kirsten, no, I got work to do. I do not want to be on here for 2 hours, and we just got carried away. But this is such a passionate topic, and I really do want to help people. People have called me, and even though they're not my clients, I still talk. I still try to give them guidance. I have still guided people and say, this is what you've done. I've helped people get out of prison that were not my clients, and I'm so appreciative because they didn't have anybody to help, and I help them. And I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank people that are in prison that continue to support me and continue to have patience with me. I thank organizations that have been on the ground having my back, because there's some things, and I'm still being attacked publicly to this day, and I can't understand why, because I'm probably real in how I fight for people, but it is what it is. But I just want to thank everyone for the continued support that you offer the organization. And with LaTanya coming on board to help us, we are going to be taking more volunteers, like Sarah volunteered with us. And I'm no longer going to tell people no. I need the help. We've grown so fast and so vast that I do want people to help, even if at the minimum of even typing up some of these support letters, because we've got a lot that we're doing, and I'm never going to stop taking cases, because at the end of the day, I want to help so many people get out of prison. And I am more active on the ground, really going to those change makers and lawmakers and really talking to them about why we believe in the power of second chances. So I thank everyone for this opportunity.
Absolutely. I think everybody has been really interactive. I would suggest as well, if you're not comfortable asking your question here in the chat, reach out to any of us directly. Karen is very, very active over on Instagram, so Fighting for Freedom with the number 4 rather than FOR. Please head over and follow her on Instagram. Follow her here on Facebook if you haven't followed myself or Sarah or BBB. Some people just don't feel comfortable, and that's okay as well. Private conversations are very valid. Anthony said, what are your thoughts on individuals seeking to file clemency before the governor's term is over?
I think that they should file, and the reason why I say that they should file, because even if their pardons are not acknowledged, it's still on file, and I believe that they're still in the line. I'll just share real quickly. I started on the federal level, and I filed pardons in 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, all the way down, and it wasn't until President Biden on his way out, and I'll be completely honest and completely transparent. I did not do any advocacy behind it. I just filed the pardons, left it there. People, I remember one girl literally took me off of Curlings because I wasn't even communicating with her. But believe it or not, they were granted. Out of the 10 pardons, it's not pardons on the federal level, it's clemency. But I filed 10 federal clemency, and out of the 10, we won 6, right? And again, so it's best to file it anytime, right? And I know the odds is that, there's a possibility that you have a governor that will at the last minute probably start to deny all those pardons, and people don't want to take the chances. They want to wait to the new administration. But from what Karen Morrison has seen, and don't quote me on this, but I have not seen them actively denying. And so I would rather put a pardon in now, that in the event that we can put some political pressure, because that's what happened with President Biden. There was a lot of political pressure. And at the end, by the time he was finished, my understanding was the last couple weeks of his presidency, he ended up granting almost 2,500 commutation applications. And I really am very impressed with the staff at the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. I don't know everyone there, but I'm pretty sure they're all fantastic. And we've seen them under pressure with Governor Northam. They have stayed in that administration, and they worked all the way up until Youngkin took his oath of office. And by the time Northam finished, I believe it was over 1,200 pardons that they were able to grant. So if I were you, and I'll say this to people, because again, those that don't have an advocate or a family members, I have heard and I've seen it for myself, but because people will do their pardons and they'll send it to me, and it is good enough. Don't let anybody ever try to tell you that a pardon is not good enough for you to file. Don't ever let someone discourage you from filing a clemency application that you have handwritten and written yourself, because you don't have to spend astronomical amount of money to get granted. Take the opportunity, write your own clemency applications, fill it out. The Secretary of the Commonwealth has actually streamlined the process. You can go on, get a hard copy, send to the prison, fill it out, write a sincere letter to the governor, answer the questions, and your clemency application can be granted. It has happened, and it will continue to happen. So don't ever say, well, I don't have enough money to get or pay someone to do it. We, of course, take pro bono cases. We do ask people to donate money. Those organizations, we've been blessed that we have donors that will donate. Walmart has even donated to us, and we take cases at a pro bono cases. We have more pro bono clients than anyone else. Can someone read that message? I'm sorry, I took my glasses off, but there was a message that just came up from, is it Kirk?
He said, thank you, ladies, for the great convo and for being so informative with everything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your support. Yeah. No questions.
I know.
I feel like I answered everything.
Come through. I feel like you've been super informative, and for me, like, parole isn't, like I said, my wheelhouse. And I think that's the beauty of having someone like you come up and shed some light on here, because it is. I think unless you are in the thick of it, you don't understand. And you know, we have been approached by people for help with a parole packet, and I'll be doing, you know, my own this year and helping someone advocate. And this will be his 5th time going up for juvenile parole. And so, you know, this is now something that I'm becoming more acquainted with and wanting to know about and understanding how to advocate for him. And I think there are things that we can do, even if our loved ones are not eligible for parole, to help, because when we look back 6-7 years ago, half the people that are now eligible for parole weren't. And so things are constantly changing, and there is such a crossover between parole and pardons that I think, you know, when we talk about someone without parole, you know, a lot of people do go for pardons, and the same sorts of parameters apply across both. So I think that, you know, this conversation is not just parole specific, but also when we talk about showcasing someone that's inside and wanting to get early release, that's across the board. That can apply to everybody, whether you're parole specific or not.
Right. And remember too, I don't know if I said it, I didn't mention it, but when you file a pardon, it has to go through the parole board. The parole board is the lead investigator. They will vote on it, and then once they say yes, they approve it, then it goes to the investigative team. And again, you know, I will never badmouth people that have a job. I just, you know, my heart goes out to them for the things that they have to do, and we don't know what they're actually going through. My heart tells me that they want to grant more people. I just want us to be so much more supportive with them. And you know, and Sarah has done it, you know, Kirsten, I'm just like really meeting you for the first time, so I don't know what you have done and you haven't done, but Sarah has reached out to board members and thanked them for the opportunity to present her husband's case. And as a human being, you don't always want someone to constantly be criticizing you. You know, that's not healthy for anybody. And so we take the opportunity, and even I have grown with Chair West, right? I have sent her email thanking her for helping me to elevate my platform when I listen to her and the guidance that she tells to, you know, the applicants. And I have come back and said, hey, I made a mistake with one of my clients, but because of what you said, I've changed my direction. And now, you know, I hope that when they come back in front of you, that you'll see the transformation that the client has made. And we just want to, you know, we want to thank everyone. We thank politicians. We thank everyone in this space, especially the space of criminal justice, because it's not easy. You know, you have people that are victims of crime, real, like you said, true victims of crime. I don't care what people say, nonviolent drug offenses, they're victims of crimes, period, right? And so we know that the hard work, and even with Governor Youngkin, like I thank Governor Youngkin, because when I see him and I'm in his space, he recognizes me and he talks to me. You know, I've had Democratic governors that I've gone up to that kind of like look at me and keep walking, right? But Governor Youngkin, no matter how many times I've approached him and talked to him, and you know, I brought the Tony Lewis case to his attention, and I did it privately, and he told me I'm going to look into it, and I got a response from the person that was supposed to be looking into it. So I know that he really wants to do something. I just want us to be able to embrace the Republicans and not always be against them, and just kind of tell them, you know, thank you for the work, and just encourage them to say, we're a community of criminal justice advocates, and we really welcome them to really take a look. And before I go, I will say this, and ladies, we could circle back, and any advocates that's on this call, email me, and let's try to use the last 7 months of the Republican administration to come together, and let's ask Kelly G to give us an opportunity to meet with her and present some of the cases that you've been advocating for the last couple of years, and say, Kelly, these are the cases we're asking you to take a look at. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to advocate for the release of your loved ones, and especially to a person that can make a decision. And if Kelly G says that she believes in second chances, well, this is her opportunity to start to use her administration. Kelly has been in office since last year, September, and she has not granted one pardon since she's been there. Not one. Well, I'm sorry, my bad. Yes, she's granted one. That was to Wesley Shiflett.
Yeah. That guy.
Yes.
To the man that killed the unarmed black man. And I tell Kelly all the time, that's your legacy as the Secretary of the Commonwealth. That is what we're going to remember you for. We're going to remember Kelly G, the Secretary of the Pardons Office, right? The Secretary of the Commonwealth, for issuing a commutation that allowed a police officer, an ex-police officer, to kill an unarmed black man. That is the legacy that she's leaving. And I think, you know, she's a really nice person. I've talked to her, but let's start to put some political pressure. Like I said, they put political pressure on the Biden, and look what he did. I don't know why Virginia can't do it. I'm not opposed to advocates calling people out. People think that I don't want advocates to get on their lives and say what they have to do. Man, call them out. Listen, y'all do what you got to do, and I'm going to do what I have to do. And listen, when you open the door, we coming right behind y'all. I'm not opposed to advocates doing that. Everybody got their own way to do things. It's just not my way to do it. But I applaud you for the work that you're doing, man. Be that force. Yo, let's get it. Let's get these people home.
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, like then that's my thing as well. We very much talk about, and we hear a lot of advocates and also people on the inside talk about, no matter what I do, it's never going to be enough, right? I feel like the parole board are thinking the exact same thing right now, because they release people and they have public hearings, and you know what people come with? Instead of congratulations, welcome home, it's like, well, you still haven't done enough.
Right. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this again. I'm neutral when it comes to this. I have gotten people granted under the West Parole Board, and I have gotten serious offenders granted under the West Parole Board. And so what I tell people is that polish it's not Karen Morrison. I polish my clients off. And I utilize those returning citizens, and we get them on the call, because I am not experiencing interviewing, but my people are experiencing interviewing. You have people that you have known that have gotten out of prison and they want to volunteer. Use those volunteers to connect them so that they can understand what it was like to go through the parole process and what was successful and what didn't work. Right. And I promise you, I have Sergio Hayes, who again is very instrumental. Sergio works with me, alongside me. He's come with me to events, and Sergio is a fantastic writer. And Sergio will get on calls and he will help speak to people that are going through the parole process, and he helps prepare them. Right. I have another person, but I'm not going to call his name because we don't speak anymore. But I've utilized people who have come out and help us in this space to help people get out of prison. Karen Morrison is not doing this all by herself. I am not, and I will never say that I have done this all by myself. I have so many people that have supported me. There's people that have seen me be real tired and like, Karen, can we help you? And I have taken it, and I've always shouted out people for helping me. Fighting for Freedom has come a long way. We were founded in 2020. My board members, Kimberly Snodgrass and Delisa Purchase, like I could name a whole bunch of people. Valerie Bright, oh my God, Valerie Bright, who like she rocks with me every single day, is the faces behind Fighting for Freedom that makes us really well. All right, that means we gotta go.
And that means it's an antibiotic pill call for my dog.
All right, so we'll close it off. Sarah, do you want to just wrap up?
Yeah. I was just gonna comment really quick to what Karen said. Like, you know, it's not just you, it's not just Kirsten, it's not just me, it's not just that one advocate. And it brought me to something that Steve Harvey said: there's no such thing as a self-made man, because you have to have so many other people that you use to get that leg up. Not use in a bad way, but they educate you, they get you there, they're your connections, they put you in the right positions for other people. So there's nobody in this world that can say they're self-made at anything, because it truly takes a village to get people anywhere, to make a difference. It's whether it's raising children or law change or getting somebody to come home. So the amount of advocates out here, and I ask this question just in my close-knit, the amount of advocates that are out here, the amount of organizations My question to everybody that watches this live that are advocates in themselves, why have we not band together as a force to be reckoned with to promote and push change?
Because it all looks different. We all have different views on what that should look like, and I think that's where we differ. You know, like some believe in abolition, some believe in second chances, some believe in no prisons at all, right? Like, and I've done these conversations on my Facebook and said, you know, like, do we need a different system and do we need no system? And there's people out there that believe that prisons shouldn't exist at all. Now, I don't believe that. I believe they just need to look different. I think there's people that are genuine risk to themselves and society, and I don't believe that they should be out in the community in any aspect or capacity. I would like to see more people volunteer. I would like to see more people not just sitting there putting their hands out for help, but actually getting in and being like, hey, and like you said, Karen, it doesn't always have to look like hours upon hours. Like, can you go and buy 100 stamps? Can you donate $10 for JP stamps? Right? Can you, if someone's having a mental health crisis, can you book a video visit with them and just be a friend? Can you, like, it's very simple things. And I think, you know, it is what is needed in order to go, okay, well, the only way that we're going to get change is by being active and communicating and meeting with people and making relationships. And realistically, Republicans are not known for criminal justice reform, but that's what we've got. That's what we've got, right? So shouting for them to lose their jobs or shouting for them to be removed down is not going to make change. Let's work with what we've got.
Can I say this too? And we've seen what they did when they lost their jobs. We were without a parole board. And again, my hat goes off to Chadwick Dotson. I'll be the first to tell you that when the Democrats did not confirm the other 4 board members, Chadwick Dotson, he did not miss one hearing. Chair Dotson kept going. Like, he did not cancel one appointment. I could speak for myself. He did not cancel one appointment with us. We continued to meet. He gave us opportunities. And so, you know, that's real talk. He never stopped what he's doing. And I applaud his efforts. Him and I have a difference of opinion right now, but even he sent me an email the other day and said, Karen, just be patient with me. Just be patient with me. He's, you know, I feel, you know, I've talked about the Tony Lewis, but honestly, after I think I got this all off my chest, I really do believe that Governor Youngkin and his administration and Jason Myers and Chadwick Dotson, I think they're going to fix it. And not only are they going to fix it, but I'm claiming it. They're going to fix it in a big way that I feel like I will be able to use my voice and to thank them. I just have to be patient. I think they've seen what we've seen, and Anthony just made a comment, but I feel like they're going to do the right thing. And I think it's going to be more than a parole reinstatement. That's what I'm claiming. But ladies, I want to say this to you. Thank you for getting in to this space, and anything that you ever need, you please feel free to reach out to me. Sarah already knows that I will do whatever I can, because we need more people like you. This is not competition. The more people that come into the space and really help people get out of prison, I want to hand some of these cases to you guys, because I'm literally exhausted with all the work that I'm doing, and I want more people to come in, but people have to understand it's not about territory for me. I'm still protective of my people, because I don't want, they're very vulnerable and they will spend money, and I get calls all the time, and I compromise my own values to say, well, what can I do to help you? You know, again, that's how I add on to pro bono cases, because when you keep hearing that someone paid this amount of money and somebody took it and did the work, how do you say, well, still pay me? Like, it's hard for me. It's hard for me to say that. But we are an organization that has been developed as a nonprofit, and we do need more donations, because the more donations we get, the more people that can come in and work for me. And we are a second chance organization. I did have some men that had come out of prison and was working for me, and I had to lay everyone really off because I got so exhausted. I couldn't keep taking cases to keep paying a payroll. I needed an operation budget. And when I finally said, Karen, I just can't do this anymore, I had to tell everyone, I have to fold that part of the business, but I also encourage them to branch out on their own, and I would support them and I would recommend them and I would send them cases. And we've been able to do that. But, just thank you, everyone. I know it's been now almost 2.5, 3 hours, but I hope it was informative. I hope that you guys, got some really good information. And I tell, I'm gonna say that I'm gonna end this on this note. The wives, man, I salute you. I salute y'all. The advocates that are in the space that are authentically doing this. And sometimes I remember when I started, I wasn't getting no money. And I did that for 5 years because I had a full-time job when I started. And the biggest case that I ended up getting out was a guy who had 16 years. And man, did I work the 3 years for his case. And this is a thankless job because when he came out, we went our separate ways, and I didn't even speak to him. And so for those women who get on the ground and help their loved ones and they don't even get a hug or a thank you card, we thank you. We thank you for the work that we're doing. And we thank you for all the sacrifices that you've made and all the things that you've given up to be in the space and to just be able to reunite people back into society that have been deemed no longer citizens. I hate the word inmate. I can't stand it. But we just thank people for the opportunities that they do and to come into the space and really help us and to get in. And I'll say this, I'm probably a problem too, because I do have people that want to volunteer and want to help, but it's, it's kind of hard sometimes to try to teach people how to do the work that you learned automatically how to do. But again, I brought Latanya in and I just love her to death because now we are bringing volunteers in and she has the patience of a saint. So she'll be able to really get people acclimated. And for stamps, shout out to Ernest that's at the prison and Joey Sykes and everybody else that do my stamp drives. They do stamp drives for me and they
I love that. I love that.
Yes.
Elena or Alina has asked how am can we get involved? Reach out. So obviously Instagram, Fighting for Freedom, Karen here on Facebook. Follow myself, Sarah or Karen. We are screaming for help. Karen is screaming for help. If you want to have a conversation, what we do looks a little bit different to what Karen does. So it just depends on what avenue you want to go down. But there are always opportunities for you to help if you are so inclined.
Absolutely.
And can I end here? I'm serious. Let me do this call. I'm not necessarily parole right now, but let's any advocate that's on this call or lawyers, or I don't know who's on this call right now, but anybody, my call to you is let's send me an email, Karen Morrison. I'm Karen.Morrison at fightingforfreedom.info. Send me an email and let's start to have a conversation. I will put together an email to Secretary Kelly G and ask her to give us the opportunity to come to Richmond and meet with her, bring your cases and say to her, listen, we have these cases and you have to make sure that you're okay with doing it because we may risk if we ask her to look into these cases and they deny, then the person is denied for the next 3 years. But maybe what we can do is have a conversation with her and ask her, would she be willing to take some cases to the governor's office and see what we can do? As of right now, my understanding is there's no grants down the pipeline. And the reason I'm saying that is because there would have been a buzz in the prison. You would have heard that there's pardon examiners that are showing up the prisons and they're interviewing. And if I'm wrong, then I'll stand corrected. But there is no buzz in any prisons that any pardon officials have been showing up in the prisons to interview. And that's why we know that it's not happening. So let's see if we can, I don't want to say put pressure, but let's ask her to see what is her stand. And if the last 7 months, if she would consider granting pardons to people that have truly been deserving of this. Let's try to have that conversation, and then maybe you can bring your but let's see if we can get her to even have a conversations with advocates and see what we can do to get these people granted pardons.
I agree.
Thank you.
Close off.
Yes. Karen, I do want to thank you. You know, you always hold a special place in my heart, your family to us. But thank you also, everyone who tuned in, asked questions, and shared your time with us. This isn't easy work, but it's necessary, and it's more powerful when we do it together. So, our next live show is June 17th with a secret guest who will be sharing some knowledge around what happens inside the Virginia Department of Corrections, the impact on those who wear the uniforms, and the corruption that takes place. If you haven't already, RSVP for the event that you can find on our BBB page or either one of our profiles, mine and Kirsten's. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great night.
Have a
Thank you.
wonderful week.
Okay, so